Chapter 425. Duke Barav also had guards behind him. Unfortunately, the two unlucky fellows had just seen their companions suffer and were wondering if they had been hit by an invisible dragon when they were struck by it. Two long, sharp knives pierced their necks from behind. Sword Saint. Another Sword Saint of the Orcs. No one had expected that the Beastman Sword Saint would actually return so quickly. Duke Barav and King Piranha did not expect it, and neither did Duque. At this moment, all the elites in the Broken Ridge were gathered around Duque for a battle conference. King Eden looked at the blood splattering in front of him and was scared out of his wits. He tried to dodge, but a huge green figure quickly materialized from a blur, cutting off all his hopes. In the next second, a scorching and powerful green arm already gripped his neck, lifting his entire body up. "Don't kill me. I'm the great chief's loyal servant." Eden's feet left the ground, and he shouted with difficulty. "The great chief doesn't need a lowly subordinate like you. Remember, my name is Samuro." The holy swordsman of the horde proudly announced his name in the common tongue. He then beheaded the king of Alterac, one of the 7 human kingdoms of the Lordaeron Alliance, Aiden Piranid. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. There were more than 30 people around who witnessed this scene, and everyone's face was filled with fear. Looking at the head that was spinning in the air and flying high into the sky, looking at the head that was wearing the supreme golden crown on its forehead, everyone forgot to breathe. After their lungs exhaled the hot air, they could no longer inhale any fresh air. This was the head of a king. Before the head could fly for half a meter, it was grabbed by Samuro's left hand. Then, Samuro looked at Duke Barav with a gaze that symbolized the god of death, and his huge fangs glinted in the sunlight. "Duke Barav, your 2 sons asked me to send their regards to you. You're better off dead. As long as you're alive, they won't be able to become the legitimate heir of the Barav family." Samuro's clear common language made Duke Barav feel as if he had fallen into an abyss. Although he had long since anticipated that things would develop in a bad direction, he had never imagined that his 2 sons, who were worse than beasts, would not only learn from Eden and betray the humans, but also be so heartless as to ask the tribe's Sword Saint to take his life. His breathing had stopped, and his heart had forgotten to beat. At this moment, Duke Barav had already accepted his fate. 2 streams of tears rolled down his wrinkled face. Who would have thought that his illustrious reputation would be ruined in the hands of his 2 scum sons? Perhaps this was the result of him being too busy with his career and not disciplining his children. Just when everyone was in despair, a dazzling flash of light suddenly appeared between Duke Barav and Samuro's falling longsword. Dang! In Samuro's eyes, the dark blue ice barrier was like a huge block of ice that had suddenly appeared. This solid block of ice mercilessly rejected Samuro's attempts to raise his martial merit further. Duque had arrived. Using his powerful spatial sense and positioning ability, he flashed 3 times consecutively and ran from the command room to the roof. He had blocked this crucial attack. Samuro's sharp pupils constricted at lightning speed. Duke Marcus. Even though his entire body was sealed in ice, and even though he seemed to have used his last trump card, as the most feared enemy of the entire tribe, he seemed to have an endless supply of trump cards. Samuro believed that he could firmly suppress a Morning Star wizard who had used his trump card, but killing him would consume too many skills and waste too much time. His target was King Eden. As a sword saint with high attack and low defense, his use was reflected in concealment and surprise attacks. Without concealment and having lost the initiative, how could a sword saint go head-on against a powerful wizard with an infinite number of control techniques? Samuro did not hesitate to pull away and dodge. It was not just him. All the sword saints of the tribe did the same. Even though Duque quickly cancelled the ice barrier, he could not stop the high-speed sword saint from jumping onto the roof of a tall building beside the castle. When Duque flashed over again and prepared to use the System Elf's powerful scanning ability to find and kill Samuro, who had entered the Gale Step state, another sword saint appeared beside Duke Barav. Duque had no choice but to flash back again. That sword saint had been killed by Duque in an instant, but Duque had completely lost sight of Samuro. 30 minutes later, in the tribe's temporary camp, Orgrim let out the loudest and most heartfelt laughter since he had landed on Lordaeron. "Haha, Ha! The head of a human king. Ha! The head of King Eden, who had died with grievances, was Samuro's most outstanding achievement. The golden crown on Eden's forehead told every orc chief of the night's harvest. Samuro, you're the chief meritorious service today. I'll allow you to carry this head around the entire camp. Thank you, Chief. Samuro's eyes were filled with ecstasy. This was the highest honor a Horde warrior could receive. Orgrim punched the Alterac Kingdom's capital on the map. Today is the day of victory for the Horde. We are going to destroy the capital of the Alliance. The entire Horde camp was in an uproar. The head of a king. This was the first time they had obtained the head of a despicable human king since the start of the war. Every Horde warrior raised the weapons in their hands and let out a loud roar, releasing the grievances they had been suppressing for a long time. This was the glory of the Horde. This was the orcs' military achievement. Orgrim walked up to the high platform of the camp and took Eden's head from Samuro's long sword. He raised it up high, and a tsunami of cheers erupted from below. Today is the day of victory for the Horde. We will use the head of a human king and the destruction of a human kingdom to tell all living beings on this continent that going against the Horde is destined to fail. It will definitely be destroyed. Today is the day of glory for the Horde warriors. Let us take this victory with our own hands. Loktar! Loktar! 50,000 voices rang out in unison. The Horde moved out with unparalleled killing intent. With a thirst for victory. A thirst for fresh blood. The thunderous footsteps could be heard even from a few kilometers away. Duque, who was overseeing the broken ridge, had a blank look in his eyes. His face was green. After thinking for a long time, Duque let out a long sigh and waved his hand. Pass down my order, everyone retreat immediately. Why? General Haas's neck was red. Because Eden is dead, the Horde's morale is at its peak. But because our king is dead, the soldiers desire revenge for his majesty. Haas's eyes were bloodshot. I have a message for you and your soldiers. What is it? Keep the land, but lose the people. Keep the people, but lose the land, but recover. Duque said something that the people of Azeroth could not understand. On this day, the capital of the Alterac Kingdom fell. Chapter 426. The Alterac Kingdom was destroyed. Orgrim was smart enough to control the number of orcs that attacked. 3,000 people, half of them elites and half of them soldiers. More than 2,000 of them were orcs, many of them were trolls, and dozens of ogres. This was a number that tested Duque's mental fortitude. Duque had been using a high ratio of casualties, and Orgrim had noticed this. That was why Orgrim attacked with a force that was close to teasing Duque. Alterac's mountainous terrain was a natural barrier for humans, but not for the Horde. Duque only sent the Silver Hand Knights and the Windrunner sisters to guard the rear, and did not defend to the death. Reality proved that Duque's decision was right. General Haas, who was not far from Duque, saw many trolls with white and blue skin climbing up the cliffs around the broken ridge. They were throwing spears at the Holy Knights from above. They are Frostmane trolls, a branch of the Frost trolls. They have been active in the Bronzebeard dwarves Dan Mola. Now they seem to have been recruited by the Horde, Duque said calmly. He could almost imagine that if they defended to the death, the Holy Knights might be able to hold on, but the normal human warriors would definitely collapse under such a three-dimensional attack. Alterac did not have the protection of snow in the summer. After the Silver Hand Paladins retreated, the entire capital city was set ablaze. The warriors of the tribe roared loudly and wantonly celebrated the destruction and conquest. Duque's face twitched as he snorted coldly. He saw the orcs pulling out large amounts of frozen meat and other rations from the cellar. In the cold Alterac, there was frozen soil 2 meters below the ground. It was the best place to make an ice cellar. Most of the Horde were people who did not mind meat. This batch of meat would obviously be a strong support for the Horde in attacking Lordaeron. Duque could not help but sigh. Orgrim had succeeded in the end. Although the situation was not as bad as the original history, it was not much better. In the original timeline, the second battle of the Dark Portal had completely changed the fate of the Alterac kingdom and the Bara family. The treacherous King Eden surrendered to the Orc army and launched a counterattack against the Alliance army. They incited peasant riots in the areas controlled by the Alliance. The rebels repeatedly harassed the Dalajan troops around Hillsbrad, preventing them from supporting the Alliance forces fighting on other fronts. Very soon, the actions of the Alterac kingdom incurred the wrath of the Dalajan mages. The Dalajan swiftly and decisively dispatched an army to completely destroy the Alterac kingdom and raze it to the ground. This was the Alterac ruins in the future. 10 minutes later, Duque saw the Knights of the Silver Hand, who did not have many scars, and the Windrunner sisters, who were covered in sweat. Wather seemed a little dissatisfied. Deputy Commander-in-Chief, why did you send out the retreat signal so early? We can still kill more tribes. In Duque's eyes, Uther was not a qualified commander. His leadership was limited, and he did not see the big picture well enough. He was like the most perfect saint, spurring everyone to move forward with almost strict faith. Uther was indeed the most perfect flag, but not everyone was willing to live a more puritanical life than a Puritan. Most of the time, Duque only used Uther as a fierce general. Duque smiled faintly. This is not a good place for a decisive battle. If you were somewhere else, you could kill 100 Horde warriors in an hour. Here, you can only kill 40. Save your strength, there is still war to fight. Pack up, we will immediately set off for Lordaeron. If we don't leave now, the tribes will reach your home before us. Not only Uther, but Sidan and Theon, the paladins from Lordaeron, also raised their eyebrows. Ignoring the paladins, Duque turned to General Haas and said, "Bring the Eagle Knights and all the infantry you can muster and follow me." Haas was stunned. He turned to look at the Alterac refugees in the distance. What about the Alterac citizens? Leave them to the local garrison. What if the Horde attacks them? Haas and the other Alterac generals were anxious. Duque's eyes sharpened. His sharp gaze reminded Haas of the eagles that were flying over the snowy mountains, about to pounce on the prey. I've been fighting with Orgrim for so long. Do you think I don't know what he's planning? Believe me, before Orgrim split up to attack the Broken Ridge, he had already led the majority of his troops to Lordaeron. Who knows, they might arrive even faster than we thought. Elusia's eyes were red as she silently stood behind Duque. She knew what Duque meant. Her two goddamn brothers were leading the way for the Horde. With them leading the way, the main force of the Horde would pass through the Alterac Mountains at a terrifying speed. Duque had guessed correctly. Other than the 5,000 soldiers that Orgrim had sent to the rear, the rest of the main force had begun their rapid march in the afternoon. Just as the Barov brothers had said, the Alterac army had given up on these roads. Even if there were a few bunkers on the road, the Barov brothers would shout at them with the contract they got from King Eden, and the soldiers in the bunkers would quickly retreat. This was an era where information was scarce. Other than the commanders of the Alliance, the king, and the generals, no one had the right to receive magical messages. Most of the messages were delivered by horse. The subordinates of the lesser nobles did not know that their lord was dead, but after seeing his signature and seal, they quickly retreated from the bunkers. Orgrim was able to quickly lead his soldiers through these narrow checkpoints. He thought that the Barov brothers would be of some use, and he was pleased to find out that his thinking was correct. The road ahead was still very dangerous. The orcs and trolls did not mind climbing the mountains, but the ogres were much more troublesome. Without Gujar, their movements were much slower. For a stone path like this, as long as there were a few soldiers blocking the way, once the corpses piled up, the ogres would not be able to pass through. Orgrim was not willing to give up on the ogres, especially the twin-headed ogre warriors. So, he urged his army to quickly advance. He knew that once his army passed through the mountains, no one would be able to stop the Horde's giant axe from cutting into the heart of the Alliance. Once he succeeded, Grom Hellscream, who was trapped in the Silverpine Forest, would be freed. Based on his understanding of humans, most of them would rather give up a large piece of land in order to gather all their forces to protect their capital. Chapter 427. The main force of the Horde spent 2 days traversing the snow-covered mountains, descending west to the hilly region. Until now, the beastmen had not seen a single human. Some of the warriors even grumbled that they had lost the chance to kill. However, the conquerors of the Alterac kingdom caught up from behind and triggered their nerves. Their great chieftain assured them that they would soon have that opportunity. Yes, they would have the chance. 3 days ago, when news of Alterac's destruction spread, Lord Darren, and even the entire alliance, had a heated argument. In the command tent of Lord Darren's front line between Silverpine Forest and Tirisful Glades, a noble general roared like a madman. That kid in the vice commander's seat is an idiot. We gave him 50,000 troops, but he still let the horde get under our noses. Mograine, who knew Duque the best, mocked him with clear disdain. If you lead the army, you'll only give 50,000 to those barbaric green monsters. Retreat. Fail. Lose the capital. This is the second in the alliance to lose the capital. Who's next? Lord Darren? Iron Forge or Riptide Keep? Are we competing to see who will fall faster? No, we must keep the initiative in the hands of the people of Lord Darren. Your Majesty, you should use your influence to take back the position of commander and vice commander. Another duke jumped out and slammed the table, attracting everyone's attention. His suggestion was immediately echoed by many nobles. Bang, bang, bang. He slammed the table, and Mograine did the same. As one of the few nobles who was extremely powerful, Mograine was not inferior to anyone in terms of making noise. Watch your mouth. Duke Shade. Changing the commander will only cause more chaos. Mograine's exposed muscles bulged, his veins bulging. The two commanders you speak of have done a good job. Under their leadership, we killed 500,000 beastmen. The only reason for this is that there are too many damned greenskins. The one called Santos did not give up. If His Majesty Menethil leads us, we can kill 1 million orcs. Admittedly, this was a very skillful bootlicker. If it was any other time, King Terenas would have accepted it with a smile. Unfortunately, this was a time when they needed the help of the allies the most. The king of Lord Darren, who was sitting on the highest seat, said calmly, "If I were the commander, there would be no alliance." The nobles immediately shut up. The white-haired King Terenas rubbed his temples and turned to look at his best commander, High Lord Mograine. "What is your opinion?" "My Mograine. We can only retreat. The best soldiers of Lord Darren have been transferred here. The remaining city guards can't possibly deal with the core elites of the Horde. If the combat power of this Horde is as terrifying as Deputy Commander-in-Chief Marcus described, a few of the nobles stood up like cats whose tails had been stepped on. As a pure warrior, he did not know much about strategy. Since Orgrim had sent him a letter to lead the army to the north, he continued to send small groups of troops to attack. The humans' performance when they had a solid base was much worse than when they were fighting in the wild. If these guys were allowed to return to Lord Darren, it would definitely increase the difficulty of the attack by a few levels. For the past few days, there had been continuous drumming in the north, as if telling the Horde that they were on guard. In reality, as soon as the Horde's troops got close, the drumming would become more intense, and according to the scale of the Horde's attack, more human troops would pour out from the camp. The annoying paladins disappeared for 2 days, and then returned. The Silver Paladins even personally killed small groups of troops. This situation lasted for 3 days, and then Grum suddenly realized that something was wrong. Oh no! The humans are escaping! Chapter 428. The hanging sheep beating the drum was a trick used by the ancestors of Huaxia. It was definitely something new for the tribes. When Grum led his army towards the Lord Darren camp that had at least 100,000 people, he only saw less than 1,000 cavalrymen and dozens of paladins torturing his small army. Go! Go! On the plains, those with 2 legs could never outrun those with 4 legs. No matter how much Grum stared, he could only watch as the last troops of the Rotterdam kingdom left them in the dust, while the tribe could only eat dirt behind them. In fact, the Lord Darren army that retreated 2 days earlier could not make it back to Lord Darren. The terrain of the Tirisful Forest itself limited the speed of retreat. Not to mention, the 100,000 troops were squeezed on a forest road that only allowed 2 carriages to travel side by side. No matter how fast they marched, it would take them at least a week to reach Lord Darren. There were not many kings in this era who dared to use teleportation. King Tyrrhenas was almost going crazy. He had seen the orcs' godly skill of attacking cities with his own eyes. 2 orcs carrying a tree trunk dared to rush towards the gate of the city. If left alone, the gates would be opened in 2 to 3 minutes. Quick, quick, quick! My Kalia! My Arthas! Tyrrhena's heart broke when he thought of his wife and children who were still in Lordaeron. Unlike most other kings, Tyrrhenas had children at an old age. He only had Kalia when he was almost 40, and then Arthas. In this era where people married early and had children early, it was not wrong to say that he had children at an old age. He did not spoil his children very much, but he loved them as much as any father in the world. Tyrrhenas had already asked Mograine to abandon the army and lead the Lordaeron knights back. He was still afraid that they would not make it in time. In fact, the horde had already arrived a day before the vanguard of the Lordaeron army arrived. Your Highness! Your Highness! The orcs are attacking! Arthas, who was in the palace, was stunned. He raised his handsome but childish face and looked blankly at Melev, the captain of the royal guards, who had rushed into the palace in a hurry. What? It was not that the Rotterdam kingdom did not receive the news. In fact, when Alterac royal city fell 2 days ago, Duque had already sent a magical message. Duque repeatedly warned that the tribe would likely arrive within 3 days, but none of the people from the Rotterdam could come up with a solution. Many nobles believed that it was impossible for the tribe to reach the Broken Ridge within 3 days because it would take at least 7 days for the humans to travel by land. When King Tyrrhenas was not in Lordaeron, Arthas was in charge of the kingdom. Of course, the 13-year-old Arthas was already quite assertive, but because of his age, he was still more of a mascot. At this moment, he completely ignored the nobles who were waiting to be summoned and were now whispering in fear. He suddenly stood up and waved his hand, gesturing for Molev to come forward. The orcs have arrived? Yes, Your Highness, the guard captain answered quickly. Melev was an experienced soldier. When he was young, Tyrrhenas had promoted him from a border guard to a guard. As time passed, he slowly rose to become the captain of the guards. Arthas knew him very well. Molev wasn't a coward. Right now, his face was pale and his body was trembling. They crossed the Alterac Mountains earlier than expected. In fact, by the time I reported to Your Highness, they should have already advanced to the shores of Lordaeron Lake. Arthas quickly walked past the guard captain and strode out of the inner palace. He practically jogged with the guards through the hall, climbed up the spiral staircase of the nearest tower, and walked to the nearest balcony. The melodious sound of a piano could be heard. The sound was so soft and pure that it seemed to make all the anxiety in one's heart disappear. It was the sound of Arthas's sister, Kalia. This was Kalia's piano room. When Arthas barged in wearing leather armor, the maids who were waiting by the piano, as well as Kalia herself, all raised their heads in shock. They stared blankly at Arthas, who was followed by Molev and the other guards, rushing in. Arthas? Princess Kalia asked tentatively. It's an emergency. Arthas waved his hand and quickly walked past them. Princess Kalia immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. She lifted her snow-white dress and trotted all the way to the balcony after Arthas. Then she was stunned. The 2 siblings felt as if they were struck by lightning. There was a buzzing sound in their ears, and they could not hear anything. All other irrelevant things in their field of vision were filtered out. They stood there motionless, like marble statues. From the high east balcony, they could see the most beautiful scenery in the whole of Lordaeron. Nearby was the blue, sparkling Lordrel Lake that was as wide as the sea. In the distance, there was the endless, undulating Alterac Mountains like a barrier. At this moment, the scenery was still so breathtaking and majestic. However, on the empty grassland between the scenery and the white city walls of the Rotterdam Kingdom, there was a group of green people that were constantly squirming. This bright green torrent, which had nothing to do with nature, kept twisting and turning. It was like locusts eroding the entire grassland, spreading all the way to the shore of the lake. It was as if they wanted to fill everything in their field of vision with this green. This was not an illusion. Deputy Commander Duke Marcus' repeated warnings were not alarmist talk. This time, the horde had really come. with an unyielding murderous intent, with an endless amount of destruction. Arthas heard the screams of the maids behind him. However, other than the sound of his sister's breathing, he could not hear anything else. Molev! Arthas's roar woke the captain of the knights, who was staring at the scene in the distance with his mouth wide open. Your Highness! Molev quickly lowered his head. Sound the alarm. Close the city gates immediately. Get all the soldiers to the top of the wall. Other than defending the city walls, there is no other way to defend against their first wave of attack. Arthas, who was very assertive, made his decision. But, Your Highness, there are still thousands of refugees waiting for inspection outside the east gate. Arthas's cheek muscles twitched. Just force the door open. There are at least 3,000 refugees outside. Molev looked like he was about to cry. Arthas slapped him. Idiot! These 3,000 people are dead for sure. If we sacrifice 300,000 people in Lordaeron to save 3,000 people, we will be the sinners of Lordaeron. Go. The captain covered his face and quickly left. Chapter 429. Prince Arthas was right. This was the only way he could save the majority of his people. To be so resolute at such an inexperienced age was definitely a rare and valuable quality. Arthas was also wrong. This was the same as abandoning his own people, even if it was only a small part of them. In this era where sacrifice, courage, and chivalry were emphasized, most kings who were brave enough would choose to send their generals or even personally lead the army to fight for a chance of survival for their citizens who had yet to enter the city. Princess Kalia covered her mouth and nose in shock, looking at Arthas in disbelief. It was as if she had just met Arthas for the first time, and not as a good brother and sister who had been in love with each other for 13 years. Sister. Father took away almost all the generals and mages. He didn't even leave any champion knights for me. Arthas complained angrily. Yes, no matter how brave a general was, he could not lead a group of pigs to victory. The pressure on the western front was too great. In the Silver Pine Forest, Grom Hellscream's ferocious attack was undoubtedly the best feint. King Tyrrhenas was forced to take away almost every professional soldier in Lordaeron, except for the royal guards. Other than a small number of archers, most of the soldiers defending the city were farmers who only knew how to use pitchforks a month ago. They could not even put on their armor. Sister, you stay here. After saying this, Arthas left Kalia in a daze and walked down the tower. Molev followed closely behind. Molev, send a small team of royal guards to stand by. If the east gate is breached, immediately bring my sister to the west and find my father. Your Highness, what about you? As long as the men of the Menethil family are not dead, no one can take Lordaeron away from us. Arthas's voice was sonorous. Send my order. Have all the generals on standby lead their troops to the east gate. Arthas quickly put on a slightly larger set of exquisite armor. This was a gift from his father, King Tyrrhenas, when he was 12 years old. The precocious young Arthas looked mighty and majestic, but that was all. His body hadn't fully grown yet, so he couldn't pick up the warhammer he wanted to use the most. He could only grit his teeth and pick up a large double-edged broadsword. When he rode his horse to the east gate under the escort of the guards, he was shocked to find that the gate was still open. A large number of citizens from the surrounding towns and villages of Rotterdam City had yet to enter the city. Because they were reluctant to part with their life's wealth, they became even more flustered when they heard the rumbling footsteps behind them. They desperately tried to squeeze into the narrow city gate with their belongings. Arthas grabbed the guard's breastplate. I've given the order to close the gates immediately. Why didn't you close the door? Do you want to kill 300,000 citizens of Rotterdam? The guard at the gate argued loudly, but they are our neighbors and good friends. I know quite a few of them. Sister Mary, the traveling merchant Anon who always goes to the Silver Pine Forest. They're here. Molev exclaimed. Arthas followed the guard captain's finger and looked to the east. It was different from the view from the balcony of the tower. From this angle, he could first see a small forest a kilometer away, then the lake further away. At this moment, the fastest group of orcs had already rushed out of the small forest. The orcs were charging at a very fast speed. Although they were not as fast as the fastest horses, they were not much different from the full speed of a pack horse. Arthes grabbed the monocular from the hands of a general next to him, and he immediately saw a shocking scene. These green-skinned beasts had the same body size as the strongest humans. They had explosive muscles and huge beast-like heads. However, he couldn't see any large siege weapons, except for some heavy logs that he thought were giant warhammers and some crudely made but shockingly long ladders. What shocked Arthes the most was that the height of these ladders matched the height of the city walls of Rotterdam. Other than that, what entered his vision were giant hammers, axes, and extremely blunt swords that humans couldn't wield. He was also sure that they definitely had iron hooks and ropes. They were unimaginably barbaric, but they had extraordinary intelligence. Ah! The people under the city gate screamed even louder. They crazily squeezed into the city gate, pushing and shoving each other. The more panicked they were, the more they squeezed into the city gate. The drawbridge of the moat was filled with people and animals pulling carts. Arthes's eyes almost popped out of his head when he saw a carriage overturned on the drawbridge. A horrifying scene appeared in his and the other guards' minds. In less than 10 minutes, those brutal green-skinned beasts would step over the corpses of these idiots who wanted to squeeze into the city. They would rush into Rotterdam through the city gate that was wide open because of these guys, turning the entire city into a sea of fire and pushing 300,000 people into hell. Shoot! Shoot at those mobs! Arthes's fierce shout was like that of a devil. But, those are our brothers and sisters. The guard at the city gate shouted. He looked like he was about to cry. The next moment his voice stopped abruptly. He had never imagined that his head would be cut off by the most respected Prince Arthas with a single strike. At least 100 people witnessed this scene, and each of them was so shocked that their mouths were wide open, unable to close. Bastard! For the safety of 300,000 people. In the name of Arthes Menethil, I order you all to shoot. Otherwise, all of you will die with these mobs. The thunderous shout finally woke up the stunned archers. They gritted their teeth with tears in their eyes and started shooting. The citizens of Rotterdam who were rushing into the city cried even louder. They would never imagine the scene of their own country's soldiers shooting at them even in their nightmares. Almost instantly, there was not a single living creature on the entire drawbridge. The citizens near the moat beside the drawbridge screamed in fear and scrambled to escape from this land of death. Shoot anyone who dares to go near the drawbridge. Arthes shouted with tears in his eyes. Melov, take some people and push everything on the drawbridge into the moat. Then, raise the drawbridge as fast as possible. Melov did as he was told. They pulled every single citizen who was still in shock into the city and pushed most of the corpses and debris into the moat. However, an overturned carriage was firmly pinned down on the drawbridge. It was a carriage that carried food. The 2 horses were already dead. However, the dead horses' corpses and the food that was tied up too well were at least 2 tons heavy. It was not something that could be solved by manpower. In the past, such a situation would take a long time. Now, it was almost impossible to solve it in less than 10 minutes. Chapter 430. In the distance, Orgrim was overjoyed at the sight. Ancestors above! Attack that gate! The great chief's voice inspired every beastman around him. The beastmen who did not participate in the destruction of Alterac shouted loudly. The great chief had promised that they would have the chance to kill and destroy. Now, it was time for the great chief to fulfill his promise. The beastman warriors seemed to be on steroids. Their footsteps quickened as they charged forward. On the other side, Arthas was distraught. Some sharp-eyed archers saw to him that the orcs were carrying some crude, pre-made bridges to cross the moat. This kind of preparation was very different from what he knew of the beastmen. Furthermore, those huge wooden bridges were not something that humans could carry. But in his field of vision, there were only 2 beastmen carrying these wooden bridges. The most unimaginable thing was that these beastmen were actually wearing thick iron armor. What kind of terrifying power was this? From the tower, the beastmen looked like ants swarming across the empty space. They quickly rushed across the empty space and approached the city walls. Arthas was shocked by the sheer number of them. These brutal beasts killed more than 2,000 people who were still lingering outside the moat in front of the Lordaeron guards as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. No, some people looked at the beastmen with hatred, while others secretly glanced at Prince Arthas. Arthas did not notice, because the beastmen had already filled his eyes. Now, from the nearest point of his field of vision to the far distance, to the grasslands and groves by the edge of Lordaeron Lake, to the valley where the cliffs of the mountains split open, he saw a dense crowd of orcs. His dream of waiting for his father to lead the army back was shattered. The horde was already there. They filled the valley and surrounded the city. Now the whole city looked like a dead leaf on a tree in autumn, about to fall. In the magic transmission mirror, Arthas had seen how the beastmen treated the fallen shattered ridge. He did not want that scene to happen again. The young prince worked hard. He had initially ordered the ballistae to shoot at the beastmen, but the effect was terrible. If it was a human army that was lined up neatly, one shot from a ballista could kill at least 10 people. The orcs who were charging in a scattered manner were clearly the bane of ballistae, which dealt high single-target damage but did not have large AoE attacks. Most of the ballistae did not hit their targets, which made the already flustered defenders very frustrated. Soon, the orcs entered the range of the archers. Fire! The scene of the enemies falling to the ground one after another did not happen. These terrifying monsters were wearing armor that was thicker than that of humans. Just by hearing the clanking of arrows, Arthas estimated that the armor of these monsters was at least a third of an inch, 8 millimeters, thick. Arthas suddenly came to a realization. That's right. The military manual that was personally written by the Alliance's Vice Commander Duke Marcus and distributed to all the Alliance's high-ranking generals had a line that said that bows and arrows were useless against the strong orcs. Only heavy javelins could kill orcs better. Javelins! Where are our javelins? Arthas bellowed. They've all been transferred away by His Majesty, Molev said with a sad face. In the midst of hesitation and panic, a large number of orcs had already rushed past the firing range of the long-range weapons. Thousands of orcs threw crude wooden bridges onto the moat, and some orcs who could not wait any longer even began to cross the river. Arthas' heart sank. It was midsummer, and because of the temperature, the water level of the entire Lordaeron Lake had dropped. The water level of the moat that connected to Lordaeron Lake had also dropped. It was only about 2 meters deep. To most humans, this was a disaster. But for the huge and burly orcs, who were over 7 feet, 1 tall, it was a depth that they could easily cross. He did not know why the orcs were so confident that they could directly jump into the water, but it was obvious that the orcs had planned this beforehand, and they had succeeded. The orcs either rushed over the bridge or crossed the river with crude shields to protect their heads. The orcs began to use huge wooden ladders to climb the city wall. Because the wooden ladders were generally too heavy and had barbs, the defenders could not push them away at all. The gate can't hold on any longer. A scream made Arthas tremble. Only 4 orcs rushed over the suspension bridge, and they used huge logs as battering rams to violently attack the gate. The gorgeous white gate seemed to be on the verge of collapse. If the huge gate had not been well covered with iron sheets, the huge impact alone would have been enough to blow the gate open. From this angle, Arthas could not see the whole thing clearly, but he could hear the sound of wood cracking and metal twisting. Arthas knew that the gate would not be able to hold on for long. The Prince of Lordaeron shook his head frantically, trying to put the shouts behind him. He was distraught. More than one orc had climbed up the city wall not far from the archer tower he was standing on. He immediately realized that if he did not leave quickly, when the surrounding city walls were all occupied by orcs, he would be surrounded and killed in this archer tower. Molev obviously realized this as well. He waved his hand, and the royal guards rushed down the spiral ladder to open a path for Arthas. The result was not good. In just a short 10 seconds, Arthas had already heard the screams of at least 7 people before they died. "Your Highness, hurry up and leave." Molev's voice came from below. Arthas quickly swung his legs. The metal leg armor made his steps a little heavy, but he maintained his balance well. The scene in front of him suddenly brightened. He came out of the narrow staircase door of the archer tower, and the terrible sound of fierce fighting suddenly rushed towards him. This sound was completely different from the sound of the Archer Tower, which was 2 or 3 stories higher than the city walls. Arthes was stunned for a moment. A second later, he immediately discovered that there was a burly green-skinned orc waving a warhammer at him. His mouth was wide open, revealing his sharp fangs. He waved his heavy warhammer. Arthes had no choice but to swing his sword to meet the orc's sledgehammer. Bang! After a muffled sound of metal and wood colliding, the prince was sent flying. He hit the battlements and saw stars. He painfully realized that he was not an adult warrior. Even though he had a burly body that far surpassed his peers and trained himself strictly, his muscles were still not perfect. His strength was still not at its peak. "Your Highness!" Molev rushed out like lightning, stabbing the orc who tried to attack Arthes with his spear. At this moment, every single person from Rotterdam heard the roar of the city gate collapsing. Chapter 431. The moment Arthas stood on the city wall again, he felt the heavy impact. The vibration made his teeth chatter, and his armor hit his leg armor, producing a clear knocking sound. Even the battlements beside him were shaking. Although it was not a good thing to let the orcs cross the city wall and enter the city, it was better to let the orcs climb the city wall than to let them pass through the city gate quickly. At least the guards on the city wall had not given up. Behind them was the city of Lordaeron where their families were. This gave the guards great courage. Under the command of the low-ranking officers, they used their spears to kill the orcs even though their hands were trembling. If there is no way to form a tight formation to fight against the orcs, then for the unskilled recruits, using spears will at least have a better chance of killing the orcs than using swords and shields. At least in the middle distance, the recruits with spears still had a chance to kill the orcs. The orcs' open and wide moves were not difficult to break. Even for the recruits, they would most likely hit the target with their spears. As for where they would hit, it would depend on whether Lady Luck was on their side. "Hold on!" he shouted to a lieutenant who was standing near the city gate and looking up. "Call some people over and block the city gate." "With what, Your Highness?" the slightly panicked young officer asked Arthas. "With anything you can find," Arthas replied. He looked outside the city wall and saw the countless orcs, the orcs who were attacking and preparing to destroy the city that he was supposed to inherit. Arthas's face was filled with the darkest despair. On the high tower of the palace, Princess Kalia clenched her hands and looked into the distance nervously. Nearby, everything was the same as before. The round towers with a white background were all magnificent. Beside the huge towers were gorgeous flying buttresses inlaid with all kinds of exquisite carvings. These supporting pillars that extended from the sides of the towers surrounded and protected the towers well. Just like the vast territory of Lordaeron, they surrounded and protected the most beautiful pearl of the Lordaeron continent, Lordaeron City. But in the distance, death and destruction were spreading. Even if they were unwilling, after the east gate of Lordaeron City was knocked down, the huge crash could be heard clearly even in the palace 2 kilometers away. "Your Highness Kalia, Her Highness Arthas has ordered us to escort you out of Lordaeron immediately if the east gate is breached." A captain of the Wang family's guards stood at the entrance of Kalia's piano room with a group of solemn-looking guards. Ignoring the trembling of the beautiful maids beside her, Kalia put down her binoculars and pointed at the silver-white figures on the city wall. Those were the warriors of Rotterdam. They didn't take down the city walls. The beautiful princess was still trying to defend herself. The tears rolling down her exquisite face broke the guards' hearts. If there's a hero who can block the city gates now, Lordaeron can still be saved. Rotterdam could still be saved. The entire Rotterdam alliance can still be saved. Although he did not have the heart to break the fantasy of the young and beautiful princess, the guard captain was still loyal to his duty. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, we can't hope for a miracle. The truth is that the Alliance's army has yet to arrive, and the east gate of Lordaeron has already been breached. Many battles have proven that humans are unable to withstand the attacks of the orcs in urban warfare." "But he'll come," Princess Kalia said in a different tone. Then, as if to strengthen her tone, she clenched her fists and straightened her curvaceous body, emphasizing loudly, "He'll definitely come." "Was he?" The guards did not know, but every maid beside Kalia knew. Who was that he? Ever since he gave the princess that unique and beautiful magic rose, her heart had been captured by him. Every night she would dream of him. Every morning, reading the battle reports about him was the most important morning lesson for the princess. Every time she saw how he wiped out so many orcs with his brilliance, and every time she saw how he brought a powerful ally to the alliance, the princess's face would blush like a young girl in love. That's right. He was the only hero in the princess' heart. The young hero who captured her heart, saved countless people, and led the entire alliance, and even the entire human race to victory, Duke Marcus. The guard captain continued to persuade her, "Your Highness." The horde's attack was too fast, and Alterac was defeated too quickly. They couldn't even form a decent line of defense. Sir Marcus is not a god. He can't create so many troops out of thin air to save Lordaeron. His Majesty's vanguard will take at least a day to arrive. No, he'll come. Even if he's alone, he'll come. He's the hero of the alliance. He's saved countless people who were persecuted by the horde. He'll definitely come to save Lordaeron. Save? Kalia wanted to say, "Save me," but when the words came to her mouth, she suddenly realized that there was nothing between her and Duque. Ever since that meeting, the two of them had not communicated at all. And what made her even more depressed was that Duque seemed to be infatuated with a female high elf ranger general. The captain seemed to want to say something, but was interrupted by Kalia. "Say no more. My brother is still fighting on the city wall. I won't run away alone. If destruction is the fate of Lordaeron, the fate of the Menethil royal family, then I will accept it calmly." After Kalia finished speaking in one breath, she bit her lip hard, her beautiful blue eyes staring into the distance, quietly waiting for a miracle to happen. Everyone could see that Princess Kalia was close to being possessed. She was madly infatuated with Duque, who had a halo of miracles. That absolute obsession had sublimated into a kind of blind obedience, a kind of faith. This kind of fanatic behavior was the biggest headache for the guards. The guard captain suddenly pointed at the black dot in the distant sky. "Excuse me, Your Highness. Even if we have to tie you up, we will send you safely away. Look, the horde's wyverns are almost here. When they arrive, we have no confidence in sending you away." Kalia suddenly shouted, and everyone could hear the ecstasy in her voice. "No, open your eyes. Those are griffins, not wyverns. Can't you tell the difference between red and white?" The guard captain looked in shock at the black that covered the southeast lakeside and rushed towards them at high speed. A few seconds ago, it was still a black, but a few seconds later, he could see faint white wings vibrating. It was indeed a griffin. The horde's wyverns were all red dragons, and there were no white-winged flying mounts. They really came? At this most critical moment. Chapter 432. The city could not be defended. Without reinforcements, they could only unleash 50% of their 100 combat power unless they were destined to be massacred. However, it was different with reinforcements. They could unleash 200% of their combat power. Duque was here. He really came. With an army of nearly 1,000 griffins. Before the griffins arrived, Duque moved. A series of flashing lights appeared in the air. The lights were so short and continuous that they left a long and huge arc in people's eyes. It went straight from the sky to the east gate of Rotterdam. At this moment, when Rotterdam, the core of the alliance, was about to fall, Duque arrived. There was a loud sound in the sky, and Duque made his appearance. The water elements in the air were gathering at a high speed, and the water in the moat was rising. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of orc and human warriors, Duque gathered a large amount of water and poured it into the entire city gate in just a few seconds. In just an instant, the city gate that was already open was completely blocked by a huge block of ice. "Orgrim, have you asked for my permission before attacking Rotterdam?" A loud shout, amplified by magic, penetrated the entire orc formation and reached far away. Standing proudly on the city wall, Duque's mage robe fluttered in the bloody wind. His iconic hand of magic covered the entire sky above the east gate, and countless tricolored frostfire arcane missiles rained down on every orc's head. The soldiers of Rotterdam were often fighting a bloody battle just a moment ago, but in the next instant, they were shocked to find that the fierce and powerful enemies in front of them had already been blasted in half by a terrifyingly accurate magic spell. All of a sudden, with the East Gate as the center, the orcs within 200 meters were emptied. After a short moment of shock, the entire city wall immediately burst into thunderous cheers. Long live the Alliance! Long live Lord Marcus! God bless Rotterdam! At this moment, Arthas, who was retreating to the palace under the cover of the royal guards, suddenly realized that the situation behind him had changed. The city gate at the end of the long street was blocked by a huge translucent block of ice. Arthas turned around just in time to see the horde that had just charged into the city being instantly killed by a gorgeous magic. Countless white hands of magic rained down from the sky. The only one who could do this was the legendary vice-commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, who had inherited the title of Hundred-Handed Reaper from his master. Looking at the magnificent magic attacks and the dwarf griffin knights hovering above the city walls and killing the horde with their thunder hammers, Arthas suddenly felt ridiculous. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have run. The griffin flew towards a tall tower near the city walls. When it almost stopped, an agile elven ranger jumped down from the griffin's back and stood on top of the tower, raining down arrows outside the city. The extraordinary archery skills of the elven rangers were on full display at this moment. They could shoot arrows with a long parabola just by feeling, and with the help of the tower, they could extend the range to more than 200 meters. The griffin knights that flew back to the battlefield did not use their usual trick of letting the griffin swoop down to kill the orcs. Instead, they dropped a large number of strangely shaped metal objects. These large bombs produced by the goblins were more lethal than iron grenades. Once they were hit by an impact, they would immediately explode violently. The battlefield was suddenly filled with explosions, and corpses and broken limbs were everywhere. Watching this scene from afar, Orgrim's face turned green again. Duque was definitely the only one who could make the great chief's brown-red face turn green again and again. Duque Marcus. To Orgrim, to the entire horde, this name was almost a nightmare. No, not a nightmare, but a terrifying existence that had been upgraded to a curse. Again and again. Again and again. Every time the horde saw the hope of complete victory, there would always be Duque or Duque's creation to stop the horde from achieving complete victory. It was impossible for Duque to be like the gods of legend, leaving his avatars in every corner of the world at the same time. On every battlefield, there were legends about Duque. His stratagems, his commanders, the strange but effective mechanical creations he invented, they almost always restrained the horde's offensive. Orgrim could not help but wonder if the heavens had specially sent Duque to deal with their horde. If there was no Duque, the horde would have conquered half of the world of Azeroth. On the other side, on the balcony of the palace tower, the maids who had just exclaimed were silent. The royal guards standing at the side were dumbfounded. Everyone looked at Princess Kalia, who was shouting on the balcony, in a daze. Holy light above! It's Duque! Oh, my hero! He has come to save me! He has come to save the entire Lordaeron city. Duque, laughing and shouting, Princess Kalia, who was usually gentle, virtuous, and so dignified that she could be called the model of a lady in the entire Lordaeron, was at this moment venting the grievances and fear in her heart. Every young girl had the dream of a prince on a white horse. The brutal orcs had attacked. When her father was not around, when there was no minister or general around her that she could rely on, when her young brother could not stop the enemy's invasion, when she was already pessimistic and desperate, ready to die for her country, Duque had come. Riding on a pure white griffin. A beautiful, majestic, and legendary griffin. Just as she had prayed and hoped for, Duque had come at the most crucial moment. As a savior, he had used his supreme magic to save Lordaeron City. Kalia could not describe the ecstasy and excitement in her heart. She only knew that the fanatical worship had ignited every cell in her body. She only knew that her soul would be branded with Duque's name from now on. She kept shouting Duque's name loudly, like a fanatic worshipping a god, willing to burn her life for him. After slightly repelling the horde, Duque suddenly appeared in front of the stunned Prince Arthas with a few flashes. The guards instinctively got into a fighting stance, and when they saw Duque's alliance emblem, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you Prince Arthas Menethil?" "I am the Alliance's deputy commander, Duke Marcus." Arthas wanted to take a good look at this legendary figure of the Alliance, who looked to be slightly shorter than him and only a few years older than him. But he knew that the military situation was urgent, and quickly said, "I am Arthas. Does the deputy commander have any orders?" "The situation is urgent. I need your Highness's authorization to open the teleportation circle in the east of Lordaeron City, as well as the control of all the magic towers in the entire eastern city." Chapter 433. Arthas froze for a moment before remembering something that infuriated him. Because the elite team of mages sent to Alterac had been annihilated, the entire Lordaeron couldn't find a single team of mages to activate the magic defense tower in the city. If they had the protection of the magic tower, how could the horde have attacked the city so easily? Those things could be settled later. The most important thing now was to kill the horde. Arthas was never lacking in decisiveness. He took off his necklace and passed it to Duque. "Show this to any court wizard, and they will know that it is the decree of the Menethil royal family. Press it on the magic formation, and you will gain control of any teleportation formation or magic tower outside of the city." "Thank you, Your Highness." Duque left in a flash. Seeing a series of flashes of light, and in a few seconds, he reached the teleportation formation hundreds of meters away. Arthas suddenly felt a sense of longing. It would be wonderful if Duque was his vassal. Arthas's ambition was destined to never come true. The young Arthas did not know how unreliable this transmigrator Duque was. In any case, at this moment, saving Lordaeron was the top priority. Actually, Duque also wanted to curse. It was not that he had not asked Tyrrhenas for the control of the teleportation formation, so that his reinforcements could arrive earlier. King Tyrrhenas refused, citing the unanimous opposition of the court wizards around him. Their thoughts were understandable. A national treasure could not be easily lent to someone else. Once the control of the teleportation formation was lent, who knew if there would be a backdoor in the future? Moreover, the teleportation formation was not something that just anyone could play with. Generally speaking, a Morningstar wizard who was more familiar with spatial magic could guarantee that nothing would happen when they teleported to a city with a teleportation formation. If one was not at the level of a Radiant Moon wizard, they would not have absolute confidence that the teleportation formation they created would be a success. They would not teleport a living person, and the other side would receive something that did not look like a human. Teleportation formations were mostly used between main cities, and the material costs were astronomical. They would not be used unless it was absolutely necessary. That was why Tyrrhenas did not teleport many wizards back. Now, the situation was very different. The city was about to be breached, and there was no need to keep it a secret. If they were to continue hiding, they would just have to wait for the orcs to regroup and attack, and then be slaughtered by the horde. When Duque appeared near the portal and saw the necklace Duque took out, the captain and the court mage heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that they had already discussed the problem of the portal. Obviously, handing it over to Duque was the most ideal choice. Duque did not argue and quickly took control of the portal. Of course, Duque's work was definitely different from that of an ordinary mage. No mage could be like Duque, who secretly made a copy of the teleportation portal and all the spatial coordinates of the entire Rotterdam city while activating the authority of the portal. In the name of Menethil, open the portal. The soldiers of the Rotterdam kingdom were shocked to discover that several teleportation portals near the eastern city wall had suddenly opened, and a large number of elves were rushing out of the blue and white illusory teleportation portals. Not only were there many rangers with longbows and at least 3 quivers on their backs, but there were also a few infantrymen and mages in long robes. Apart from Duque, if anyone could control the situation, they would realize that the number of elven wizards in Rotterdam City had exceeded 500. The organization of high elven wizards was completely different from that of human wizards. For human wizards, a sky wizard was usually the captain, and the ones leading them were mostly morning stars. After all, a radiant moon wizard was usually the chief court mage of a certain palace. When the battle was at its most intense, the mages under the command of the wizards would even be assigned apprentices who could only cast fireballs to make up the numbers. The high elven wizards, sky wizards, usually took up half of the high elven wizards, while the remaining 40% were earth wizards and 10% were morning stars. The ones leading them were definitely radiant moon wizards. On the surface, the Dalajan had 8 radiant moons, while Kuel Salis had 50. Fortunately, in terms of military strength, both Kuel Salis and the Dalajan only had 1 Breaking Dawn wizard each. Otherwise, the Dalajan wizards would have to bow their heads in submission. When the teleportation gate next to Duque opened, a female elven wizard with a hot figure and a robe with very little fabric walked out first, followed by 2 elven rangers that Duque recognized. Then came the other soldiers, rangers and wizards. Esteemed Vice Commander Marcus of the Rotterdam Alliance, Marion Firewing, the leader of the first wizard group of the Kuel Salis frontline army of the Rotterdam Alliance, pays my respects to you. The radiant moon elven wizard's robe had very little fabric, and Duque retracted his gaze after a single glance. Damn it! This robe was almost comparable to the insight magic robe that Duque had worn before he transmigrated. It had a high slit on the legs and a heart-shaped hollowness on the chest. Did you come to fight a war or catch a rich man? The other 2 fellows were much more pleasing to the eye. In fact, they could be considered old friends. Brigadier General Roselma Theron and her subordinates reporting to Sir Marcus. Brigadier General Haduran Brightwing reporting to Sir Marcus. Duque keenly noticed that these 2, who had been Silveryman's big 3 in his previous life, had now been promoted to generals. This was the result of him poaching Aurelia and Queen Sylvanas in advance. In order to fulfill the alliance, Kuel Salis had to send out the wizard group and rangers. The rangers, who had not been valued in the past, had now become the main force. The high elves were proud. Even though they had almost knelt before and their army had been beaten like dogs, they were still unwilling to bow their heads in front of humans. They were still unwilling to lower their heads in front of humans, so it was a blessing in disguise that Roselma and Haduran had not followed the Windrunner family's rangers. Without further ado, Generals Theron and Brightwing, please have your people quickly occupy all the tall towers. I want you to push the beastmen back. Understood. The 2 future big leaders quickly led their people away. What about me? Marion winked at Duque flirtatiously. Even though Marion had deliberately downplayed her status as a Silvery Moon counselor and even used honorifics with him as a Radiant Moon wizard, Duque could tell at a glance that for some reason, she wanted to get close to him. Duque ignored the heat in front of him. Sir Firewing, I've already opened up control of the magic tower to your people. I need you and your people to build an ice defense line along the moat. The most important thing now is to stabilize it. Understood. Marion was quite smart. At least she would not waste Duque's time at a time like this. Chapter 434. A few minutes later, the dozens of mage towers standing near the eastern city wall released a cold wind at the same time. This cold wind suddenly blew across the moat, and in just a few seconds, more than 5 kilometers of the eastern moat was completely frozen. The orcs who were dripping in the moat were instantly killed. They suddenly realized that the more they walked, the slower and colder it became. Originally, the water pressure did not feel anything, but now the strong pressure was squeezing their chests, forcing out every breath of air from their lungs. Uncomfortable, cold, and hopeless. At least 2,000 orcs were frozen to death in the frozen moat. Standing in the tallest mage tower, Marion of the Silver Moon Parliament looked at the mage tower in front of her with a little disdain. Only a 100% increase? Forget it, it's better than nothing. I can't expect anything good to come out of this barren magic civilization. After talking to herself, Marion smiled coldly and immediately contacted all her subordinates with magic. In the name of Quell, Dorii. Frozen Forest. In the Magic Communication Network, the voices of hundreds and thousands of high elf mages sounded at the same time. In the name of Quell, Dorii. In the next moment, all the mage towers in the eastern part of the entire Lordaeron kingdom moved. The spire of the mage tower near the palace was the first to emit a soft white light. The atmosphere was vibrating, and white frost elements could be seen condensing into light spots the size of snowflakes, quickly gathering on the various mage towers. Many grains of sand formed a tower. Water gathered to form a river. Rivers flowed into the sea. The mage towers violently extracted the water elements of the entire city, and then used a visible beam of light to transmit the water elements to the mage towers near the city wall. Princess Kalia, who was standing on the balcony, was surprised to see a huge white network forming in the sky above the entire eastern city. It looked like a huge spider web. Gather! Gather! Sublimate! Seeing so many mage towers emitting white light outside the city, Orgrim instinctively shouted, Gul'then. What answered him were the stunned expressions of the guards around him, as well as the lonely sound of the wind. Gul'dan was not here. The Shadow Council Warlock group and the twin-headed Ogre Sorcerer group, the only two groups of the Horde that could fight against the Alliance Sorcerer group, were not here. The former had been destroyed by Orgrim, and the latter, the Ogre magicians who should have gathered here a long time ago, weren't here either. Orgrim had a bad feeling about this. At this moment he could only grit his teeth and watch as the warriors of the Blackrock tribe used their flesh and blood to withstand the terrifying magic that was about to descend. It was only at times like this that Orgrim could truly feel the importance of the warlocks and mages of the Horde that he loved and hated. It was too late. Frozen Forest was activated. In the entire defensive line, the moat was an important link. The moat, dug along the edge of the city and channeled water from Lake Lordaeron, suddenly turned on the orcs. Countless translucent, ice-cold crystal clusters arched their spines in the moat that stretched for miles like ice hedgehogs. The icicles pierced through the countless orc warriors who were killing wantonly a moment ago, unleashing their savagery and violence. Their thick armor could not stop the icicles' sharpness. Their bodies, which had not completely lost their lives, trembled and convulsed on the icicles. The next moment, almost everyone on the defensive line saw the frozen forest, which looked like a torture rack, turning the entire defensive line into a crystal-clear, cruel work of art. Everywhere was blood red. The orcs were all stunned. Lordaeron had simply put on a hedgehog shell that was armed to the teeth. This wasn't the end. Hageron Brightwing and Theron raised their longbows high in the air. They knocked their arrows, and two rays of green light drew beautiful arcs in the sky. A second later, the sound of bowstrings vibrating could be heard from all the towers in the city. All the soldiers of Lordaeron, who were stunned at the top of the city wall, saw a black cloud rising at high speed into the sky, turning the sky black. Then, the black cloud stopped at the highest point and poured down. Unlike humans who used the density of arrows to make up for their lack of accuracy, this black cloud was actually a combination of accurate shooting and wide-area shooting. Under Duque's insistence, the Elven Rangers used steel arrowheads made by the bronze-bearded dwarves from Iron Stove Castle. After the Rangers spent a few days getting used to it, their damage was greatly increased. Many orcs could be seen to have their vitals pierced even after making dodging and blocking movements. For example, one orc had used his arm to cover his face and throat, but a steel arrow pierced through his helmet from the side, straight into his temple and killed him. Both sides were stunned. Within 30 meters of the moat, there was not a single orc alive. Attack or not attack? This was a serious question. We can't retreat. We must attack. If we miss today, we might not have the chance to take down the core capital of the Alliance so easily in the future. Orgrim roared. His plan was right. He had finally found a chance to deal a heavy blow to the core kingdom of the Alliance. He could not give it up just like that. After the brief ecstasy of destroying Alterac, Orgrim finally realized that he had to destroy the will of the humans, elves, and dwarves to resist. The 10 countries of the Alliance, 7 human kingdoms, 2 dwarven kingdoms, and a high elf. Today, the Horde did not have the absolute upper hand in terms of combat power. A protracted war was something the Horde did not want to see. The Horde was rapidly weakening. Orgrim knew that if they could not defeat the Alliance within this year, and turn the battle into a war of annihilation, the Horde would most likely be counterattacked and lose all the territory they had conquered. Orgrim gave Samuro a look, then waved his hand at the two troll chiefs. Immediately, the trolls and the sword sages of the Fireblade clan pressed forward. The trolls and elves had been fighting for thousands of years, and knew each other very well. The trolls would never lose to the elven rangers. Under the cover of hundreds of orc warriors with human tower shields, thousands of trolls approached the city walls fearlessly and started shooting at the elven rangers. The powerful and heavy javelins shot towards the tower with a momentum that almost defied gravity. Even if they missed, the javelins would still cause rocks to fly everywhere when they hit the top of the tower. The elven rangers had no choice but to dodge, and used the shooting holes of the human towers to retaliate against the trolls. This way, their field of vision and shooting were severely affected. At the same time, the agile sword sages leaped up the city walls through the gaps in the ice crystal forest, crossed the city walls, and aimed at the elven mages in the mage towers. Chapter 435. Even though each mage tower had a small team of elven guards and 2 to 3 rangers protecting the mages inside, there were still more than 10 mage towers that were attacked. There were even 2 or 3 mage towers that had all the mages inside killed in battle. However, after losing the invisibility effect and the wind step skill could not be used continuously, the rangers started a fierce battle with the sword saints. Samuro's goal was to kill Duque. Only by killing this human who had obstructed the Horde's victory time and time again could he completely turn the tide of the battle between the Alliance and the Horde. The general trend of history could not be changed by the will of man. *T. The power of a great man could not be replicated. The judgment and decision of a great leader was definitely the main factor that led the entire organization to success or decline. Perhaps assassination was despicable. However, our world was being destroyed. For the orcs' way out and to win this race war, Samuro felt that he was duty-bound. He also knew that this was a very, very risky move, but his warrior's blood was stimulating him. The rapid secretion of adrenaline in his body made him fall into a very excited state. His heart was beating faster and every blood vessel in his body was circulating at a high speed. However, his mind was blank. He pounced at Duque, who was on a mage tower at high speed. When he saw Duque, who was originally looking into the distance expressionlessly, suddenly looking at him and his team of sword saints, a cruel and cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was the smile of a hunter looking at his prey. Not good. Duque was prepared. That's right. From the moment Samuro killed Eden Pyreus, Duque was determined to kill Samuro and the sword saints of the Fireblade clan. One could be a thief for 1,000 days, but not a thief for 1,000 days. Apart from the disgusting undead clan, there was only one Duque in the world who could be resurrected. The other important members, even Lothar, who was the best at fighting, did not dare to say that he could definitely dodge Samuro's sneak attack. The other Fireblade sword saints were easy to deal with, but Samuro had to die. He had the highest tier of Gale Steps and Fatal Strike skills, and he had a wealth of battle experience. If he couldn't assassinate him, he would fight him head-on. If he couldn't defeat him head-on, he would run. Who else would he kill if he didn't? These were the key reasons why Samuro had become Duque's must-kill target. Around Duque, there were also a large number of demon spirits. Different from ordinary demons and spirits, these demons and spirits were disguised as all kinds of things, be it stones or scattered supplies. They were all the most common things on the battlefield. They did not sound the alarm directly, but were directly connected to Duque's system. In front of so many demon spirits, Samuro and his sword saint team have nowhere to hide. Have you finished writing your will? Samuro. Along with Duque's cold voice, Duque suddenly put his hands together and clenched his opened fingers into a fist. Immediately, a raging flame rose from Samuro's feet. The sound of the explosion resounded on the long street. Of course, the invisibility was immediately broken. Including Samuro, 3 of the 9 sacred swordsmen were blasted away and turned into a pile of charred meat in midair as they couldn't withstand the violent explosion. The remaining 6 were mostly covered in dust. Only Samuro was in a better condition, but he was also battered and exhausted. "Let's go," Samuro shouted to the remaining sword saints. Sword saints were not suitable for the harsh environment and the battlefield with wide area continuous damage. The price of overpolarizing attack power, speed, and dodging ability was that their physique was relatively weak. They were not like most beastmen who were born with a certain amount of elemental resistance. As for magic damage, they would take it all in. What made Samuro most uneasy was that there were huge ice walls rising from all directions at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they had grown from one person's height to 2 people's height. Furthermore, they were rapidly closing in the middle. This was to create a huge ice cover to trap all the sword saints. Samuro let out a beast-like roar. He was the first to brandish a ball of sword light to protect himself. Then he charged out like an arrow. At the same time, there were at least 5 green figures pouncing over from outside. Dang 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 dang. The continuous sounds of weapons clashing converged into one. 2 sword saints turned into corpses and fell from the sky. 3 sword saints were knocked back. After Samuro and a slender figure exchanged 13 attacks in a split second, both of them flew backwards. Samuro returned to the range of the ice barrier, while the other party flew 3 body lengths backwards in the air. Her pretty face was flushed. But when Samuro raised his head, he realized that the ice cover was actually less than 10 feet away from closing. He could now clearly see his opponent. It was a silver-haired female high elf who looked very beautiful from a human's point of view. Her skills and talent were not bad, but her aura was still lacking. The 2 female high elves who had just killed his 2 subordinates also pounced at him again. Samuro had a faint premonition that this was his last attack. If he failed, he would lose his last chance to escape. In reality, that was exactly the case. The 4 Windrunner sisters, Hageron and Lore, Thema, especially the last 2, had been dragged here by Duque after the first round of attacks. It was not an exaggeration to say that the 6 strongest rangers in the world were all here just to ambush Samuro. This showed how important Duque was to Samuro. The one who exchanged blows with Samuro was Sasha. She was at a disadvantage by half a move, but it created an opportunity for Aurelia and Servanas to attack again. The 2 slender figures were about to fight with Samuro. Samuro gritted his teeth and directly activated Blade Storm. The 6 figures dodged again. They surrounded Samuro but did not approach him at all, allowing Samuro to vent his anger into the air. Blade Storm could not be stopped just because he wanted it to. The price of an attack that could destroy the heavens and the earth was that one's movement would slow down and the exhaustion after the big move. Duque was not annoyed. He leisurely gathered an ice ball the size of a carriage and threw it over. "Aren't you very good at shaving ice? So what if you cut some shaved ice for me?" Duque mocked. It was fine for Aurelia as she held it in. Sasha, who had a low threshold for laughter, burst out laughing. The 6 High Elf Ranger heroes stood in 6 different directions and stared at Samuro. At this moment, Samuro was like a clown dancing in the enemy's cage. It was laughable and pathetic. He was not willing. He was not willing. He knew that the chances of escaping and winning were very slim. He still entered the invisibility state of wind step the moment Blade Storm stopped. He wanted to give a final blow to Duque, no, any high elf warrior present. Chapter 436. Unfortunately, Samuro was hit. 6 flares shot out in an instant, teaching him and the sword saint who followed him a lesson. Flares, a common skill of hunters and rangers. This wasn't a skill that could bring out thieves and sword saints who were in stealth with a light bullet that emitted light and heat. It had nothing to do with science or physics. Flares contained the extension of the ranger's willpower. Was there something distorting the light? Was there an invisible creature expelling the air? Everything became visible under the flares that condensed the ranger's willpower. That was why hunters and rangers could only use 1 flare at a time. Now, 6 top rangers were shooting flares at the same time. If there were two less, Samuro might still have a chance to escape. Unfortunately, there were 6 of them, covering all directions. Samuro was immediately illuminated. The moment the burly green figure was illuminated, Samuro stopped moving. His muscles were still strong and full of strength. His body still looked extremely strong, but everyone knew that he was weak. He was the hero in the eyes of the tribe, the thorn in the flesh of the alliance, the nightmare of the kings. Unfortunately, all of Samuro's fame would become history in a while. Humph. The sword saint who had been beaten back into the ice shield let out the last groan of his life. In order not to affect Samuro's last chance to escape as the new chief of the Fireblade clan, they would try their best not to disturb Samuro even if they had to die. In the end, a teardrop from his left eye tore open Samuro's determined face. Without any words, he ignored the 6 Elven Ranger heroes who were ready to make a move and just looked up at Duque, who was on top of the mage tower. Duque sighed. He admired Samuro's courage. It had nothing to do with the camp, but purely because of Samuro's spirit. Unfortunately, admiration was admiration and understanding was understanding. This didn't mean that Duque was going to give up his position as a human and lick the boots of a tribe's hero. The enemy's hero, my enemies. Duque didn't say anything either. With a knife hand posture, he slammed down heavily. Loktar Ogre. He would rather die than win. The resonant roar was the epitaph of the orc sacred swordsman hero, Samuro. On the other side, Orgrim took advantage of the fact that the trolls and orc sword saints were temporarily suppressing the long-range attackers on top of the city walls. More orcs surged forward, violently smashing all the protruding icicles with their giant warhammers. Then, ignoring the dwarf griffin knights that frequently flew across the sky to launch surprise attacks, they stepped on the corpses of their fellow orcs and launched an even more ferocious attack on the wall. Arthes, who had just left the city wall, returned to the city wall under the escort of the guards. Although he was not at the front line, his appearance still greatly encouraged the soldiers. At the same time, the generals and their soldiers who had rushed over from all over the city had also replenished the defensive line. Warriors of the Rotterdam, raise your weapons and make those despicable orcs regret having the audacity to invade our homeland. Arthes, who was not far behind Arthes, raised his 2-handed greatsword. Duque felt like he was looking at the Lich King who would raise Frostmourne in the future. Arthas's face flushed with excitement and nervousness when he saw Duke's arrival. Deputy Commander-in-Chief, Rotterdam needs more reinforcements, he said. Duque bowed lightly. As you wish, Your Highness. Orgrim roared angrily from the horde. Where are the ogres? Are they not here yet? How many more are behind us? The ogres are too slow. They are still stuck on the mountain path, Zulucid replied. You know that other than the twin-headed ogre mage, no one can command those idiots better. Then what about our men? The mountain path is too narrow. We have at least 2 clans behind us. When the horde counted the number of people in the army, they would usually use the large clans as a unit. A single clan would mean 10,000 people. Tell them to hurry up. In order to maximize the effect of the surprise attack, Orgrim ordered the vanguard to attack as soon as they left the mountain. In fact, without Duque, the horde would have already invaded Rotterdam and entered a meat grinder. At this moment, 3 bright red flares were shot into the sky. The bad premonition in Orgrim's heart grew stronger by the second. At the far end of the battlefield, near the lake between Lake Rotterdam and the Alterac Mountains, a huge cloud of dust suddenly appeared. The sound of horse hooves piercing through the clouds shook the entire battlefield. To be honest, due to the terrain, the horde did not have many opportunities to fight against the human cavalry. However, this did not mean that Orgrim did not know how terrifying the cavalry was. During the first battle in the Elven Forest, the warriors of the horde had also encountered the cavalry. The scale of the cavalry was not large, and in Orgrim's eyes, it was the only army that the humans could fight against the orc infantry. Not good. Orgrim cried out in shock. The timing of the cavalry's arrival was too cruel. It was the exact moment when the horde could not spare any strength to attack. On the southeast side of the lake, 3 huge flags were fluttering in the wind. The Alterac Mountain Eagle flag with an orange background. The Highland Knights flag with a red background. The Golden Lion flag of Stormwind with a blue background. No one would have thought that long before the fall of Alterac, Deity had already transferred the Highland Knights and the Royal Knights of Stormwind here. Now, after joining General Haas's Eagle Knights, there were as many as 2,500 knights and 7,000 cavalrymen gathered at the lakeside. They rode their horses to the battlefield from their hiding place and quickly spread out their formation. The three generals stepped out. For the fall of Alterac. General Haas closed his visor. For the blood debt of the Arthi Highlands. King Salas Tolbane held his lance. For the destruction of Stormwind City and the wrath of the kingdom. King Lang Rin raised his sword high. Charge! Bolvar for Dragon took the lead and opened the way. He was like a spear, holding his warhammer in front of him. He stabbed his horse with a spur, and in pain, the horse charged at the orc army at high speed. Most of the orcs were focused on the city wall. The white wall was unexpectedly strong, and only a few dents appeared under their fierce attacks. Only a few of the orcs heard Orgrim's command and turned around to stop the horsemen and riders from advancing. Chapter 437. In a frontal assault, there were not many troops that could match the beastmen's infantry. The beastmen, who were taller than their horses, did not fear the human cavalry at all. As long as they avoided the first wave of spears, then even if the humans and their warhorses charged forward, the chances of both sides killing each other would be 50-50. But now, it was the human cavalry that was charging at the rear. Orgrim could almost foresee that a tragedy was about to unfold. Bolvar's warhorse panted heavily, its four hooves trampling on the ground seeming incomparably heavy. Of course, when one of the beastmen turned around to look, his mouth opened wide in shock. What did he see? A skewer of beastmen. Bolvar relied on his unscientific power of holy light to directly transform into a Saint Seiya. One had to know that the middle part of a lance was made with a fragile and easily broken spear. This was to prevent the powerful recoil from knocking the knight off his horse after stabbing the enemy. However, with the infusion of holy light, the lance that should have broken on its own was turned into a steel spear by Bolvar. He pierced through 3 beastmen in one go, and continued to rely on his powerful momentum and holy light to charge into the enemy formation. 3, 4, 5. In the end, 7 beastmen were stabbed to death by Bolvar's specially lengthened 6-meter lance. Only when the 7th beastman was pierced did Bolvar let go of the lance that had finally exploded, leaving the bunch of beastmen to struggle on the ground. The moment he let go, Bolvar accurately grabbed the warhammer that was tied to the right side of his saddle. Before touching the next enemy, the huge warhammer had already spun in a circle in the air. One of the beastmen opened his mouth, not knowing if he was about to warn his companion or roar, but Bolvar's warhammer easily smashed his lower jaw like a polo ball. This strike had also broken his neck at the same time. The beastman flew backwards and fell in front of Bolvar. Bolvar rode on his warhorse and trampled over him. Behind him were the knights galloping on their horses. The reason why knights were a few levels higher than cavalry was because a qualified knight had to go through at least 5 years of training. From noble etiquette to knight's creed, from horsemanship, spear skills to swordsmanship, all sorts of combat skills were nurtured. It was not an exaggeration to say that the effort needed to nurture a qualified knight was enough to nurture 100 cavalry. It was precisely because the elites of the 3 countries had gathered together that they were able to gather so many knights. Almost every knight had gained something from the first round of attacks. They perfectly cut a huge hole in the orc formation, and the cavalry behind them waved their long swords and warhammers, further increasing the chaos among the orcs. The entire orc rear army was cut into pieces by the cavalry of the 3 kingdoms. Following closely behind the cavalry was the infantry. Compared to the magnificent formation of the cavalry, the infantry was a little lacking. 20,000 Storm King cavalrymen were already all of them. These were infantrymen who had been baptized by the flames of war. They fiercely swept through the scattered beastmen and stabbed the beastmen who turned their heads towards them to death. They followed the footsteps of the cavalry and attempted to quickly cross the entire battlefield and rush to the northeast of Rotterdam. Stop them. We just need to enter the chaotic battle. It was one thing for the cavalry to break through their formation, but they actually wanted to use infantry to circle around the rear? Orgrim was so angry that he wanted to laugh. At this moment, the ballistae in the city were fired. Arrows and boulders rained down on the front of the orc army that had become densely packed. Haas, Lang, and Salas led their cavalry to break through the entire orc army's rear army and split them up perfectly. After breaking through the formation, they split into three, made the smallest circle, and once again attacked the rear army from another flaw, turning the entire rear army upside down. There was not a single organized orc army that could pose a sufficient threat to the charging human infantry. The orcs were in chaos and did not know what to do. But when they faced the city wall, the Alliance army attacked them from the rear, and when they turned their heads towards the cavalry, they were attacked by the city guards. They had not broken through the city wall yet, so they could not retreat into the city. If they continued fighting like this, they would only be bleeding in the chaos. Orgrim was inexplicably shocked. This was simply beyond all the military knowledge of the orcs. Why could the human cavalry find the weakest point of the orcs in the midst of a fierce battle and attack it? Why did they not attack the seemingly weak points of the elite orcs that were lying in ambush? On the tower of Lordaeron, Arthas looked at Duque, who was giving orders beside him, in shock. Magic communication was only suitable for fixed-point communication. When moving, there was no spatial positioning, so there was no way to receive the message. Duque had a better idea. Let Lang turn left 30 degrees and kill his way through the slightly dirt-colored army. That's the second-rate Iron Sand clan of the Horde. Salas, you're charging too hard. Damn it, you're the king. Even though Duque was fiercely complaining, the two beautiful elven rangers beside Duque, one with gold hair and the other with silver hair, still used their beautiful voices to transmit Duque's words. General Hadgeron explained to Prince Arthas, "That's Whisper of the Wind, a skill unique to the Windrunner family. It can transmit one's voice with the wind and reach a specific person's ears within a few miles. So powerful? Then can I hire some elves who know Whisper of the Wind to be my vassals?" Hadgeron's face was full of embarrassment. "I'm sorry, but there are currently only 4 Windrunners who know this skill, and they're all direct vassals of Lord Marcus." "I see." Arthas's face was full of regret. At this time, the situation of the battle changed again. After the Alliance's cavalry attacked the orcs' rear, they returned to the vicinity of the lake, and the city's defenses were activated once more. Even though the continuous attacks made the orcs lose their bearings, they were unfortunately not many, but they were extremely elite. A row of orcs with the strongest physiques charged in the direction of Salas's Highland Knights. Salas was more cautious, and he charged towards the right side of the line of soldiers. The result of the cavalry's charge shocked Salas. After losing their lances, the cavalry no longer had any mid-range or long-range weapons. Normally, no one would be willing to collide with a galloping warhorse. Obviously, these 8-foot-tall orcs were an exception. Regardless of whether they chopped down or swung up, their huge warhammers could disregard the nearly 1-ton weight of the riders and their horses and the terrifying force of the impact. In an instant, both riders and horses were sent flying. Chapter 438. Only a few horsemen like Salas, who were skilled in horsemanship, were able to dodge the fatal blow and fight back. The cavalrymen's charge took down a lot of orcs, but they were immediately replaced by new warriors. The orcs lined up neatly in 3 rows and began to advance towards the Alliance cavalry, forcing them to retreat. Step by step, they forced them towards the lake. Although these orcs only had 3 thin layers, the quality of their individual soldiers was enough to crush the terrifying foundation of the Alliance cavalry. Even if it was just 3 rows, the Alliance cavalry would not be able to break through it. The rear began to stabilize, and the Alliance infantry was also fiercely attacked by the orcs from the center. For a moment, it was as if they were in a quagmire. Once they achieved their goal, half of the remaining orc soldiers continued to attack the city. They crossed the ice crystal forest and attacked the city wall fiercely. Soon, they used up the stones, boiling oil, sand, and other things that could be used for defense. Now, the orcs could safely continue to climb the city wall. The orcs climbed over the city wall with evil smiles and tried to climb as much as possible. Most of the orcs were pierced or shot down by the elven rangers before they could climb up the city wall, but some still managed to climb up and began to attack the guards. Arthas never thought that the orcs' ant-like siege was so terrifying. They had clearly extinguished the first wave of attacks not long ago, but more orcs surged over. The corpses of the orcs piled up and provided some cover for the orcs as they climbed the wall. They stepped on the corpses of their companions and even used them as shields to resist the continuous rain of arrows and magic attacks that fell from time to time. The orcs' attacks were terrifying. Usually, as long as one orc climbed up the city wall, it would cost the lives of 5 to 6 Lordaeron soldiers to kill it. The defense of the city became precarious again. "We can't go on like this," Arthas shouted nervously to Duque. "Commander, Lordaeron will collapse first in the afternoon. We need reinforcements." Duque smiled. He touched Arthas's blood-stained helmet like a senior. "Your Highness, although I am not much older than you in terms of military affairs, I am your senior." For some reason, Duque's smile gave the impression that Duque was proud of himself. He said in an extremely pretentious manner, "A true king or commander never defeats his enemies on the battlefield." "What?" Arthas was stunned. "A true commander will gather all the cards needed for victory before the battle begins. The so-called battle is often just a formality." "Ha!" At this moment, Duque's body was filled with an unparalleled aura. The mysterious and confident aura that lingered around him made everyone around him feel that as long as Duque pointed his finger, even if there were thousands of tribes, even if it was a cruel army that had destroyed several countries and was known as the nightmare of the human world, they would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Arthas was momentarily stunned. Hadgeron Brightwing and Theron, the 2 newly promoted ranger generals, froze on the spot. Beside Duque, Aurelia and Sasha's breathing quickened. Everyone stared at Duque's actions. They saw him proudly raise his left index finger and point it towards the northeast horizon. Following the direction of Duque's finger, a huge flag appeared. Rows of silver-helmeted and armored infantrymen walked out of the horizon. Behind them was the sun, making them look like an army that had walked out of the Age of Legends. The raised spears were like a forest, the tips of the spears reflecting the dazzling sunlight. For some reason, every soldier thought of the era when humans were united under a single flag for the first time in history. It awakened a distant legend that had been passed down from their ancestors for more than 2,800 years. That was an era when all human clans fought side by side. That was a glorious and resplendent era where victory was the end of every battle. That one answer seemed to be branded in the soul, branded in everyone's genes. What was that answer? The Arathar Empire. The greatest human empire. At this moment, on this battlefield, there was an even greater organization, the Lordaeron Alliance. 1, 2, dozens, hundreds of flags suddenly appeared on the horizon, fluttering in the wind. From the looks of it, there were more than 100,000 of them. The soldiers began to pick up speed, jogging on the battlefield. They held their heads high, their spears raised in rows. A silver-white wave appeared on the battlefield. They were clearly infantrymen, but they gave off a terrifying aura as if there were tens of thousands of galloping horses. These warriors all had distinct human facial features. Everyone looked at them from afar, but because of the sunlight, their faces were covered in a layer of golden light. Their faces became blurry, and the weapons in their hands became dazzling. Every face became deified. They seemed to have become an army of heroic spirits that had walked out from the distant past to once again fight for humanity. "It's our people. It's our brothers from the Griffin Legion. Reinforcements are here. Long live the Alliance." Every soldier suddenly exploded with greater strength and momentum. The aura that had been suppressed by the Horde rose once again, suppressing the Horde. The redness on Orgrim's face faded. He knew that he had to make a decision. They were at a disadvantage, and the alliance was attacking them from both sides. If he had enough time, he might have been able to surround them and attack the reinforcements. He could have taken out one or two of the alliance's divisions first. But now, the horde was the one being surrounded. No matter how strong Orgrim's elites were, they only had a little more than 30,000 men. Now that the alliance's troops had exceeded the horde's limit, if they continued fighting, they might collapse. At that moment, Zulud brought even worse news to Orgrim. Great Chief, there are many warships on the lake in the south, flying the Dalajan and Gilneas flags. They are less than half a day away from us. I miscalculated. Orgrim's mouth was full of bitterness. Originally, Orgrim dared to attack Lordaeron because he wanted to make use of the time difference. He wanted to take down Lordaeron before the main force returned. In Orgrim's plan, the Lordaeron army should return first, followed by Grom's 100,000 soldiers. The allied forces of Dalaran and Gilneas, who were further south, should be the last to arrive. But now, the alliance used their original advantage on Lordaeron Lake to mobilize ships to send reinforcements to Lordaeron. If that was the case, the troops in Lordaeron would exceed 200,000 in a day. Even with Grom's troops, they still wouldn't be able to take them down. After thinking for a while, Orgrim finally shouted out the most bitter word he could think of. Retreat. Chapter 439. Before the arrival of the allied army from the northeast, the tribe retreated like the ebb tide of the sea. They even avoided the alliance infantrymen who had circled to the rear of the tribe and were nailed there like a mainstay. At this moment, Dooku only lacked a feather fan and a sage-like robe. Then he could go and pretend to be a pig. The smile on his face made him look like he was full of confidence. Even though he was mobilizing troops that he already knew, it was as if he was in control of a magic box that could create an endless army of thousands of men and horses. He was always able to mobilize the most suitable troops at the most crucial time. Orgrim's fierce surprise attack turned into a magnificent ambush under Dooku's command. Just now, even the top of Lordaeron's walls could see the Dalajan and Lordaeron speedboats rushing over from the direction of Lordaeron Lake. Arthas was first pleasantly surprised to find that his hometown and his city had been saved. Then he immediately thought of something. If the Dalajan and Gilneas troops all come here, then what if the tribes of the Silverpine Forest attack south? That's right. Then what? It was not just Arthas. Several alliance generals wanted to know the answer to this question. In fact, Dooku really wanted to teach Arthas, the one riding the white horse is not necessarily a prince, it can also be Xuanzang. The one who is a paladin can also become a demon king. But in order not to reveal the secrets of the heavens, Dooku pointed to the alliance's speedboats on the calm lake in the south and teased Arthas. Your Highness, ships flying the alliance flag are not all alliance warships. Even if it was a warship, it did not mean that it only carried soldiers. The tribes will only see the alliance's reinforcements coming, but they will never know that only ships, food and sailors are coming. Be it Arthas or the other generals of the alliance, all of them were visibly moved. Dooku pointed to the huge formation of troops in the northeast. 100,000 troops are not equal to 100,000 elites. The true elites were only the few square formations at the front. The ones behind are just farmers who have been trained for less than 3 weeks. That's right, Dooku hadn't conjured the magic lamp of the army. He'd only placed the Griffin Legion in front of him for show. Behind them were the farmers provided by the local nobles of the Rotterdam Kingdom. However, after a period of training, they were at least more or less presentable when marching. When it came to real swords and spears, these guys who had never experienced blood and fire, no matter how bright their armor was, were still cowardly farmers deep down. The young Arthas was astonished. Is that even possible? Why not? Dooku combed his sweaty hair. Didn't I mobilize so many troops to save Lordaeron? As long as we can defend today, when your father's army arrives, it will be the time for our alliance to encircle and annihilate the 2 orc armies that have penetrated deep into the alliance's hinterland. Arthas' eyes lit up. Dooku's well-placed commands, his realistic disguises, and the military arrangements that had fooled even his own people. Duke's method of using his troops was an eye-opener for Arthis. It showed him what it meant to be a commander. The scenes that Arthis had experienced today were like images that had been imprinted on his soul. They had opened doors to a wider world for him, and he felt that he had benefited greatly. Suddenly, Arthis had an impulse. He strode forward and lowered his noble head to Duke. "Lord Marcus, can I become your disciple and learn the art of war?" Be it Duke or the others, everyone was stunned. The master of the prince of the strongest country on the continent. It sounded so noble. Unfortunately, when he thought of Arthis, who had killed his own father and teacher, Duke felt disgusted, as though he had swallowed a fly alive. Duke didn't reply. He turned his gaze to the distance outside the east gate. There were countless orc corpses, as well as the bodies of more than 2,000 civilians lying there quietly. Duke's pupils shrank. He remembered that Lilith had told him about Arthis's order to close the gates. He was not a saint, and he didn't have the ability to save every civilian on the continent. In Duke's eyes, there was no such thing as saving 300,000 people or abandoning 3,000 people. If he had known about the enemy's attack in advance like Arthis, he would have arranged for the civilians to take refuge more safely, instead of waiting for the disaster to befall them before deciding whether to abandon them or not. Before his transmigration, Duke had often heard of an old saying, "Don't do evil because it's small." In history, Arthis had started to fall precisely because he had massacred the citizens of Stratholme, who were about to become zombies, for the sake of the bigger picture. Duke had once wondered if Arthis would be different in this life. After all, Arthis was still a teenager, a relatively naive prince. Duke suddenly realized that personality really determined fate. The scene of abandoning 3,000 civilians had nothing to do with the original history, but Arthis still made a similar decision. Too ruthless. The experience of Arthis in history might be worthy of sympathy, but this guy was clearly the template of an ambitious and ruthless person. At this thought, Duke made up his mind. He pointed outside the east gate. A commander can be said to have to make the decision of who to let die at every moment. But the original intention of a commander is to protect the country and the people. And the soldiers who carry out the commander's orders are also willing to give up everything they have. "I think your Highness should first learn the principles of life and the way of the Holy Light from the Archbishop of Holy Light before learning the way of a commander." After saying that, Duke left without looking back, leaving the generals of Rotterdam and Arthis, who looked as if he had been struck by lightning, in a daze. Of course, there was no need for Duque to clean up the battlefield and count the losses. Duque divided the army into two parts. One part was the 20,000 Stormwind infantrymen from Hillsbrad. After the battle, there were less than 15,000 of them left. Duke allowed all of them to enter Lordaeron city. The other group came from the northern sentry towers, with the Griffin Legion as the core. Together with the remaining 6,000 cavalry, they set up camp in the north of Lordaeron city, forming a triangle with Lordaeron city. The main purpose was to prevent Orgrim's main force from joining forces with Grom Helroar's 100,000 orcs. On this day, Orgrim waited for the arrival of the ogres, while the alliance quickly organized the city's defenses and waited for the main force of Rotterdam to return. Finally, on the afternoon of the second day, the alliance waited for Mograine, who had led his army back. When the famous Ashbringers saw the flag of Rotterdam on the city wall, this iron-like man immediately got off his horse and knelt on the ground, weeping and kissing the soil of Rotterdam. Chapter 440. Whose tears were flying? Whose applause was ringing out? For the citizens of Lordaeron who claimed to be the best in the world, yesterday was definitely the most uneasy day. They used to think that war was so far away. The nobles sang and danced as usual. There were still hundreds of banquets and dances every month. Those great nobles would hold 1,000-person masquerade balls and provide hundreds of desserts at banquets. The peaceful thoughts of the nobles were greatly amplified. The citizens naturally enjoyed the peace and prosperity. Yesterday, everything changed. The savage orcs broke through the layers of defense, crossed the mountains, and killed their way into the city. Even though most of the orcs were killed on the city walls, There were still a few who broke through the defense lines and started killing in the city. The strongest troops in Lordaeron were all stationed at the city walls. They had no choice but to hand over the task of killing the orcs to the city guards. These city guards, who had not undergone strict military training, were good enough to deal with gangsters, but they were not enough against the elites of the Blackrock clan. The number of orcs that broke into the city was 68. These 68 orcs had caused nearly 5,000 casualties. On average, each orc had killed 2 or more city guards and caused more than 3 or more civilian casualties. Almost every family in the Eastern District had a funeral. The citizens of Lordaeron panicked. Even though there were more than 30,000 Alliance troops stationed at the back, many citizens and nobles woke up from nightmares. There was even a guy who shouted, "The orcs are coming," in his nightmare. This caused a chain reaction of panic and caused more than 100 people to trample each other. It was only until Duque asked Arthas to activate the magical lights throughout the city that the soldiers of Lordaeron sang the Lordaeron military song when they patrolled that the citizens of Lordaeron felt a little more at ease. Just like that, the people of Lordaeron welcomed Lord Mograine's 8,000 cavalry the next day. Then, 2 days later, they waited for the exhausted King Tyrrhenas to return with his main force. Even though they were forced to return, Tyrrhenas and his infantry were welcomed back like heroes. Almost every citizen gathered at the West Gate and welcomed the return of their army with the most passionate and sincere cheers. This was not a triumphant return worth bragging about. All the people wanted was a sense of security. Tyrrhenas was not in the mood to deal with the enthusiastic people. He hurried back to the palace. There, Deputy Commander Duque, General Lang, General Salas, General Kudrin, and Major General Haas had been waiting for a long time. Tyrrhenas did not put on any airs as the leader of the alliance. He followed the rules of the alliance and bowed to Duque, Lang, and the other kings. "Thank you very much, Deputy Commander-in-Chief, the 3 generals, and our allies for the rescue of Rotterdam City. Without your help, Lordaeron would be forever shamed." Tyrrhenas was serious. If it wasn't for Duque, he would be a stray dog now. "You're too polite, alliance leader. Didn't we establish this alliance to help each other today? If we don't work together, humans, dwarves, and elves will all be killed by the Horde. We may not even be qualified to be slaves." Duque was also very polite. The kings exchanged pleasantries as well. After the necessary formalities, Tyrrhenas did not hesitate. "All right, let me get straight to the point. Although I also think that 300,000 soldiers are needed to ensure that Rotterdam City will not be attacked by the Horde, the truth is that Rotterdam City does not have enough food to sustain 300,000 soldiers and 400,000 civilians for a long period of time. In the past, Rotterdam has always been providing food, weapons, and soldiers to the various countries. Now, it's Rotterdam's turn to need the support of the various countries." He spread out his palms, asking for money, rations, soldiers, everything. The leaders of the various countries felt bitter. The Wildhammer dwarves almost never farmed. They lived a half-farming, half-herding life. Usually, they let their griffins fly around the mountains to catch food for themselves. Salas Arthi Highlands had just been plowed by the Horde's locusts. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't need cavalry to defend Torrentburg, he wouldn't have even sent out his soldiers. Alterak's home had just been raided less than a week ago, and there wasn't even a single blade of grass left. After all the twists and turns, Dalaran, which was relatively stable, was the wealthiest among all the countries. The next richest was the Stormwind Kingdom, which had been a disaster for more than a year. The summer harvest in the Hillsbrad Hills could not be hidden from anyone. Unfortunately, Stormwind had hundreds of thousands of mouths to feed. As soon as Tyrrhenas spoke, there was an awkward silence. Fortunately, everyone could remain silent except for Duque. The alliance had been fighting with the Horde for so long, and everyone had unknowingly gotten used to Duque being the real boss. The coordination was under Duque's control. The logistics and magical fields were under Duque's control. Even the command of most of the country's military, as well as the recruitment of new members, were under Duque's control. If Lothar wasn't busy dealing with the western battlefield, everyone would have almost forgotten that Lothar was the commander-in-chief. There were also troops from Rotterdam, Gilnis, and the Dalajan. Facing the gazes of the kings, Duque's expression was calm. Who said we're going to fight a long and drawn-out battle? Why can't we be more optimistic? Now is the best time for us to wipe out the main force of the horde. As soon as he said that, all the big shots were stunned. Their thoughts really could not keep up with Duque's pace. Weren't the horde invincible now? Didn't they see that no one could stop the horde's advance? The flames of war had already spread across the entire northern continent. In the eyes of the kings, there was no safe place in the entire continent. From the southernmost earthy highlands to the northernmost Long Song forest, from the westernmost South Flow coast to the easternmost hinterlands, the horde could be seen everywhere. Even though the alliance had the upper hand on the western battlefield, they could not do anything to the remaining 100,000 horde. Alterac had just been destroyed, and now Duque actually said that they could wipe out the main force of the horde? If it was the Duque from a year ago, he would probably have to face endless doubts and even ridicule at this moment. But now, Fus laughed, Lang laughed, and Kudrin laughed. Almost all the kings who were fighting at the eastern battlefield looked at Duque with kind eyes. Everyone was in a relaxed mood as they waited for Duque to say the answer that they had been waiting for a long time. To be honest, Terenas was very nervous just now. In order to obtain the position of the leader of the alliance, the Rotterdam kingdom had put in a lot of effort. However, he was not sure if his and his country's efforts would be reciprocated at this critical moment. Now, it seemed that the countries of the alliance were not only reliable under Duque's coordination, but could also give him enough surprises. Duque smiled and opened a real-time image of a magic message. Latest news, Gul, Dan sold Orgrim. Chapter 441. What? Gul, Dan betrayed Orgrim? For most of the higher-ups in the alliance, this was an unbelievable thing. It was as if someone had told them that Duque had betrayed Lothar. Their first reaction was that it was absurd and laughable. They were from the same faction and had always worked closely together. How could they do such a thing? But the image in front of them forced them to believe it. This is an image sent by my subordinate Darniel, who risked his life. The first thing that came into view was a huge sea and a desolate beach. Most of them were confused by this beach, but King Salas Trollbane recognized this coast. Sea-gazing cliff? Duque gave an affirmative answer. Sea-gazing cliff was the hinterlands. The sea grew larger in everyone's field of vision. Looking into the distance, they could see some ships sailing near the shore. They were as ugly as garbage ships, and everyone recognized them as the transport ships of the horde at a glance. The ships that brought the hated tribes from the other continent to this place. Although Kurtira's and the Bloodsail Navy under Stormwind sank most of them to the bottom of the Endless Sea, the remaining half still brought destruction and death to the Alliance. A large group of orcs were either on the beach or in the shallow water, pulling the long oars with all their might to move the ships. An ogre sat in the middle of each ship, beating a drum that represented exertion. The orcs pulled hard with the rhythm, sending the ships into the sea. Seeing this, a general said, "Their chief is leading an army to attack Lordaeron, but they're in the hinterlands." At this point, the corners of everyone's mouths were already curving into thoughtful smiles. At this moment, a red dragon flew past. Everyone recognized it as the Red Dragon cavalry of the horde. He rode the red dragon and circled in the air, seemingly observing the situation below. Following the direction of the red dragon, everyone saw a familiar figure on the first ship, the demigod warlock Gul, Dan. Whether the Alliance was willing to admit it or not, he was a very dangerous fellow. At least he had the record of fighting Antonidas in South Shore, and both sides suffered heavy losses. After Duque repeatedly stressed that this guy was the culprit who had conspired with Medivh to open the door of darkness and send over 1,000,000 beastmen, Duque's expression changed. Gul, Dan was even more dangerous than Great Chief Orgrim on the Alliance's list of enemies. At this moment, Duque waved his hand, and Elugia, who had been standing behind Duque, stepped forward. The Beastman Dragoon rider controlled his mount and flew to the front of the ship before shouting in Beastman language to Gul, Dan. Elugia immediately translated, "What do you use these ships for?" The dragoon rider continued to follow the ship with his mount while waving his free hand. Looking confused, the warlock monarch raised his hands in confusion. The dragon cavalry let Long Fei get closer to the ship and roared a few more times. Elucia continued to translate, "Turn the ship around. The chief's main force is in Lordaeron, not on the other side of the sea." The dragon rider shouted again. Gul'dan was still gesturing that he could not hear. This time, the beastman flew directly to the top of the ship, less than 30 meters away from the warlock. Suddenly, Gul'dan's hand shot forward, and 2 green rays shot towards the dragon cavalry's chest, while the other shot towards the red dragon. Sharp pain exploded in both the beastman and the red dragon. The world around the dragon cavalry turned black in an instant. It was a huge black ball of magical energy. Clearly, this ball was rapidly absorbing their lives. By the time the dragon cavalry fell from his saddle, he was already a dried corpse. The red dragon was not much better off, its huge body withering at a speed visible to the naked eye. But when it fell into the sea, it was suddenly caught by a huge net. Several huge twin-headed ogres fished up the struggling red dragon and killed it with a single blow. Then, they skillfully dissected the red dragon's corpse on the deck. Clearly, they had done this kind of thing many times. The video ended here. Elucia obediently retreated behind Duque. Duque said, "This is a video from this morning. In fact, from the moment this army retreated from Cuel Salis, I had Cudrin's men follow them from afar." The Brute Hammer King nodded. A confident smile appeared on Duque's face. "To the Horde, this is definitely a rebellion. Of course, we have not received any definite information on whether Gul'dan is rebelling or not. But we can be sure that in the upcoming battle around Lordaeron, the Horde will not receive any magical support. No warlocks. No terrifying twin-headed ogre mages. There are only a bunch of muscular bastards who only know how to wield axes and clubs. Ha, that's great. I don't like those guys anymore. Finally, I can kill to my heart's content." The slightly boorish Cudrin laughed loudly with the dwarves' unique loud voice. "If we can get rid of these 2 main forces of the Horde, Torrential Fortress will be saved." King Soras let out a long sigh of relief. Lang clenched his fists. In fact, he was more passionate about destroying the Horde than anyone else. The fall of Stormwind City was a pain in his heart. As long as the Horde was not destroyed, the southern continent's Stormwind City would not be able to recover. Of course, the happiest person was Terina's. Being trapped in a siege, he was the one who suffered the most. The vast territory of Lordaeron would be cut off, and no one knew what would happen to the other areas. Terina's was still mature and steady. "All right, I suggest that we urgently summon Chief Lothar to discuss this matter. Of course, I suggest that we strengthen the defenses of the city and wait for Chief Lothar's arrival." Duque's suggestion was naturally seen as reasonable and was unanimously approved. After the meeting, Duque waited outside the hall for an unexpected person, the Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas. "Your Excellency Marcus, can I have a word with you?" Duque hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. They sat down in a side hall, and Arthas seemed to be venting his frustrations as he told List what had happened. "On the night I abandoned the 3,000 civilians, I received a long reprimand from my father. He scolded me for not learning how to be a king. A king should put the people first. Although I think what my father said is right, I still think that my decision that day was not wrong. There is no comparison between the lives of 3,000 civilians and the lives of 300,000 people." Duque's voice was calm. "Do you love your father and sister?" "Of course." Arthas replied without hesitation. "What if the enemy captures your father and sister and forces you to choose between them?" "No. I will never let a situation where I have to choose between the 2 happen." Arthas suddenly became furious. "That's right. As a king, you must first prevent the worst from happening." Chapter 442. "But I can't avoid it." Arthas clenched her fists tightly. "That fellow Ichines claims to be the regent, but he wants me to make decisions at crucial moments. There are many things I don't know. By the time I find out, I already have to choose the lesser of two terrible decisions. I don't understand. In essence, what's the difference between me and you, the commander, when making decisions? The surroundings immediately fell silent. Even though this side hall was empty, who knew if someone was eavesdropping next door? No, it should be said that Duque was certain that someone was eavesdropping. He didn't even need the system notification to hear the heavy breathing. Duque didn't know who it was. Duque only knew that he had to be careful with his words. Duke rested his chin on his hand. Can I ask you a question that is a little cruel? Go ahead. Arthis made an inviting gesture. You're drifting on the sea with a ship full of refugees with no hope of rescue. Suddenly, you discover that a third of them are infected. What will you do? Arthis revealed a pained expression. I'll have that third jump into the sea. Quarantine and then leave the infected to fend for themselves. This was the most common way to deal with a plague in this era. Duque didn't comment. What if you discover that the remaining half are infected as well? Have them jump into the sea as well. Arthis's voice had already become softer. After a while, you'll discover that half of the remaining people, enough. You're interrogating my conscience and soul. Arthis's eyes were bloodshot as she slammed the table and stood up. No, I'm not interrogating your conscience and soul. Duque looked at Arthis coldly. I'm just telling you, don't use your shallow common sense to judge every problem and force yourself into a dead end. The biggest difference between you and the commander is that you consider problems comprehensively. Comprehensive? I was just asking you what to do. I'm not forcing you to deal with things according to the rules of this era. Arthis was stunned. Then what to do? Duque's voice became stern. Have you learned any medical knowledge? Have you asked if there are any doctors among the refugees? Is there a priest? Have you confirmed the type of plague? Is there any hope of a cure? Arthis was bombarded by 5 consecutive questions, and he tried to defend himself, but I don't have any common sense at all. That's why I asked you to find out if there are any doctors among the refugees. As the commander-in-chief, it doesn't matter if you don't understand. You can just leave it to the experts. You need to appoint someone who looks like the most reliable person to be your advisor. If you don't know how to choose, then let the people in that area choose one themselves. If you can't make a judgment, then let the experts do it for you. Arthis was shocked at first, but after the shock, she felt a kind of heartfelt admiration. It turned out that there was a reason why Duke Marcus, the deputy commander-in-chief of the Alliance and the Horde, who had won so many great battles, was successful. Was this the difference between him and a top commander? That's right. After receiving the warning from the deputy commander, since the regent minister was incompetent, he should shoulder the responsibility and arrange things as comprehensively as possible instead of doing nothing and waiting for the situation to deteriorate before making a painful choice. Arthis lowered his head and bowed deeply to Duke. I've learned a lot. Sir Marcus, I only have one last question. Arthis asked solemnly, what if, in the end, I have no one to rely on and no common sense in this area, and I have to make my own choice? You will avoid the worst situation, and at the same time increase your options. The lack of a better choice itself proves that your vision is too narrow. If your wisdom and insight are not enough to create some better choices for you, then choose the choice that you feel the most guilty about. If you really try your best, your heart will feel better, at least you can comfort yourself. Comfort myself? Arthis was a little dazed, and her whole body was dizzy. As if she was sleepwalking, she thanked Duque again and then left. Duque watched Arthis, who was supposed to become the Lich King in history, leave like this. Duque also sighed. He also felt that it was a pity for the fall of the historical Arthis. This could not be blamed on the historical Arthis. This itself was the plot of the most despicable and shameless demon, the most proficient in human nature. Duque did not know if he could reverse the future of Arthis's fall. Perhaps he could change the tragic fate of death like Lang, the Van Cleef father and daughter, Lillis, and the others. Perhaps he could not, but at least he tried. Instead of regretting doing nothing, it is better to regret after doing it? Duque seemed to be talking to himself in a self-deprecating manner. A crisp female voice suddenly reached Duque's ears. Duque instinctively felt that the voice was a bit familiar. The next second he found out who the owner of the voice was: Princess Kalia Menethil. Duque was dumbfounded. "Your Highness." The girl in a pure white low-cut dress stood alone at the door of the side hall. Looking at the girl, who seemed to be suppressing her excitement and crossing her fingers in front of her chest, Duque suddenly felt a sense of purity. He did not know if there was a slight sigh in his breath. Obviously, at this moment, all the noise disappeared because of the girl's focus. Any other elements would be reduced to impure things. The pure, focused, and even a little fanatical light in the girl's eyes was overwhelming. It almost turned into a physical love, like a prayer that went straight to the heart. Duque almost instantly felt the adoration from the girl's eyes. Princess Kalia is madly in love with me? It had to be said that Princess Kalia was indeed a stunning beauty. Her exposed skin was crystal clear, and her body was so slender that it was like porcelain that would shatter with a touch. Her whole body exuded a kind of beauty that made people lose their minds. The problem was, Duque had never had any feelings for Princess Kalia. In Duque's eyes, the royal family of Lordaeron was a trap. He had no intention of befriending the royal family of Lordaeron at all. When he met Princess Kalia's eyes, Duque was stunned. Her breathing was heavy, and the girl was obviously very, very nervous. She seemed to have forgotten what she should say. The princess's voice was full of trembling, and she was a little incoherent. "That day, thank you for the rose. But I was most touched. When Lordaeron was about to be destroyed, you saved the whole city, and me. That's what I should do. Can you let me be your follower?" Duque was stunned again. Chapter 443. When Duke said, "This is what I should do," the girl was in a state of confusion. The girl's mouth opened and closed slightly, shouting silently, "Duque, I've been." The girl's heart was like a willow branch swaying in the wind, wavering. The thumping of her heart could be heard clearly, shaking her eardrums and chest. Her chest was so uncomfortable that overflowing feeling was like a volcano was about to erupt in her chest, as if it was going to tear her heart apart and break out in the next moment. The air had become dry, and her mouth was half opened like a machine with a locked angle, unable to open any wider. The slightly warm air invaded her lungs, and when she exhaled, it made her entire trachea and mouth feel like it was on fire. She was embarrassed, but her rationality was frantically urging her to take action. Duke Marcus was the most outstanding young man of this generation in the Alliance of the 10 Nations, the greatest hero. There was no one else like him. He was busy, glorious, and the hope of all mankind. If she gave up this chance to confess, she might not be able to wait for another chance. Countless voices rushed into Kalia's mind. "Say it. Kalia, muster up your courage. Kalia, aren't you determined to be like those young girls courageously pursuing their love in novels, and grasp your own happiness? He is the Duke of the Southern Continent, and once the war ends, he will return to the Southern Continent. Father, who always wants to obtain more territory for Lordaeron, will not allow you to marry far away." Although she had the most glorious background in the entire continent, she was very clear that this princess identity that all women were envious of was not valued by Duque. There was no deliberate flattery, no fear of keeping a respectful distance, only a kind of calmness. Neither servile nor overbearing, but a gaze that made people feel extremely comfortable. This was what she wanted. This kind of young hero was what she had been chasing after in her dreams countless times. She shouted in her heart again, "Take action. Kalia." Her rationality was driving her to take action, and then Kalia mustered up every drop of courage in her body, and what she thought was a shout was actually the volume of her voice. "Can you let me be your follower? Oh my God. What nonsense did I say? I should have said, are you willing to go out with me? But, how shameful. I can't say something like that. Ooh." Kalia cried. The young girl cried bitterly in her heart. Especially after seeing Duque's stupefied expression, The girl was so ashamed that she wanted to die. What did I say? Gritting his teeth, he squeezed out the last drop of courage in his body. I want to travel the world with you. But something didn't seem right. Wouldn't that become a standard follower's speech? I just need to say that I like him normally. Ooh. But Duque was keenly aware of Princess Kalia's intentions. As a veteran player who had transmigrated on the eve of version 6.0, Duque did not know that Princess Kalia would become the most popular follower of the priest temple in the later timeline. This did not prevent Duque from having a better impression of Princess Kalia. Duque stared at Princess Kalia. Her golden waterfall-like hair was tied into a unique bun at the back of her head, revealing her slender, ivory-white neck. There was a faint blush on her cheeks, and her serious and anxious expression made people feel as if they were in a dream. At this moment, Princess Kalia showed her most girlish side, the kind of pure beauty that made all men's hearts palpitate with excitement and could not help but want to protect her. In addition, she exuded a noble and extraordinary temperament with every movement she made. This was a fatal temptation to any normal man. Phew! After a short moment of confusion, Duque's brain worked at high speed. In terms of feelings and senses, it would undoubtedly be more than enough to satisfy any man's vanity if he managed to woo the renowned elder sister of Arthes, a genuine and noble princess of noble lineage. Think about it, if this Lich King Arthas, who had once been the Prince of Lordaeron in history, had defeated more than 17 heroes, including 3 kings and a blue dragon, and made the whole continent and even the world of Azeroth tremble, he would have no choice but to call Duque brother-in-law. Oh, that kind of sourness, just thinking about it would make one feel high. Unfortunately, reason told Duque that this was courting death. Just as Duque could not touch Arthas now, Duque could not touch Princess Kalia either. If the wheel of history could not be stopped, then the ending of World War II at the Dark Portal was almost a foregone conclusion, then World War III was inevitable. According to the original history, all investments in Lordaeron were destined to be reduced to nothing under the fierce attack of the Calamity Army. If 1 million gold was exchanged for coins and thrown into the sea, it would at least cause a huge splash. However, investing in Lordaeron in any form was destined to fail. It was not the kind that would fail from the end of the street, but directly to the center of the earth. Thinking of this, Duque made a decision. The princess would accept it, but he would not let Lordaeron get a single cent. Duque shamelessly used the moral integrity of a Mediv. At this moment, Duque was possessed by a saint. Unknowingly, he had the purest temperament and the greatest sentiment. Duque's gentle smile, those eyes that seemed to be able to suck in one's heart, and that magnetic voice intoxicated the inexperienced Princess Kalia. There are as many people who wish to become my follower as there are stars in the sky. Kalia, what do you know? Princess Kalia was sensitive to the fact that Duque did not use words that made her uncomfortable like princess or highness, but called her by her name more intimately. It was clearly a very common thing in people's daily lives, but it made Kalia ecstatic. Can I call you Duque? Duque nodded with a smile. I'm actually an intermediate commandment priest. After saying that, Kalia showed Duque her holy light. It was indeed extremely pure holy light, and her cultivation was not low. Duque was dumbfounded. Duque had taken in many subordinates. There were a few future marshals and heroes. There were some who could fight, some who could eavesdrop, some who could lead troops, and some who could take charge. However, there was really no pure healing profession. A priest who specialized in healing was a big healer. A big healer? Do you understand? A group of old men fighting bloody battles at the front and almost dying from serious injuries. To revive them, they often relied on the most crucial mouthful of milk. Oh no, greater healing skill. At this moment, Duque was even more determined to abduct Princess Kalia. Chapter 444. Not a bad holy light. Kalia, you pass. Then, Duque smiled, I've received your kindness. I'm not an unreasonable person who ignores a good wish. Do you want to get rid of this suffocating life in the palace? Get rid of this suffocating life? In Kalia's pitch-black mental world, a bolt of azure lightning suddenly flashed, almost illuminating her entire soul. A suffocating life. Even though there were countless people around her who envied her, who knew the pain and suffering she had gone through. Since she was young, she had received the strictest training in palace etiquette. She had to smile without showing her teeth, wave her hands to limit the angle, take every step according to etiquette, straighten her neck, level her eyes, and wear that suffocating corset every day. For the sake of her figure, she could only eat a little, no matter how good the food was. Kalia, you're going to marry a future king. You must have the strictest requirements for yourself. Mother said this every day. She lived like a puppet every day, all kinds of lessons followed one after another. She had to be stared at every moment, every minute, and every second. When had she ever truly had her own space and time? She was infatuated with Duque. Was she really infatuated with a hero? Or did she yearn for that kind of safety and freedom? Kalia's eyes turned red in an instant. Can I really do it? Won't I bring trouble to you, Duque? For a second, Duque felt a little guilty, feeling like he was a bad uncle who used a lollipop to kidnap a little girl. But thinking of the despicable things that Tarinas did after the Second War of the Dark Portal, and how Tarinas allowed the orcs to have a chance to rise again, Duque felt no more guilt. Anyway, there was a high chance that Lord Darren would still have to kneel. Instead of letting this innocent princess become homeless, why not I, Duque, be kind and adopt the homeless princess in advance? Duque righteously encouraged the Mediva's moral integrity, his face full of holiness that was even more holy than a paladin's. Yes, Kuria. Everyone has the right to pursue freedom. If one is like a puppet for the rest of one's life, bound by bloodline and rules, can that still be considered as having truly lived? Kalia's defenses were completely shattered. She didn't even know when she was so excited that she held Duque's hand with both hands. She also didn't realize that from this angle, Duque could see the peak of the mountain. Then my father, mother, and my brother. Kalia suddenly showed a trace of pain. With or without you, Arthas will be crowned king. Lord Darren will still be the most powerful kingdom in the world. Duque, who knew the direction of history, lied through his teeth. That's true. Thinking of the power of the Rotterdam and her brother's outstanding king's potential, Kalia suddenly felt at ease. Then, when will you take me away? I'm willing to take the risk to bring you out of this cage and bring you to a wider world. But not now. The war between the Alliance and the Horde hasn't ended yet. I can't do anything to break the Alliance. At this point, the light in Kalia's eyes dimmed. But Duque's next words ignited the light of hope in her eyes again. Within this year, the war will probably end. At the latest, within a year. Really? Only a puppy would lie to you. Princess Kuria left contentedly. Duque also left. As he left the palace, Duque glanced at Elugia. Even when her family and country were facing great changes, this eldest daughter of the Bara family still followed him obediently. Duque quietly sighed. If he remembered correctly, when this war ended, Tarinas would use the excuse that Eden Pyreus had colluded with the Horde and betrayed the Alliance. As the leader of the Alliance, Tarinas would attack Alterac's territory. As the leader of the Alliance, Tarinas was extremely noble when it came to fighting against the Horde. But this greatness was actually based on two reasons. First, the threat of the Horde was indeed big enough. Second, Tarinas wanted to take advantage of the invasion to unify the 7 human kingdoms and rebuild the new Arathar Empire with Lord Darren as the core. Tarinas' original intention was to expand Lord Darren's influence in the Alliance. But as the war went on, that was not the case. Silverpine Forest was destroyed, and soon Tirisful Woodland would also be in trouble. Now that Lord Darren had almost fallen, King Tarinas did not have the time to think about these things. When he could take a breather, he would probably have to face the tragic situation in his country and the pressure from the powerful alliance of nobles. Disaster relief required money. Reconstruction required money. The people were starving. The nobles were complaining. Yet the alliance won against the Horde, an outsider, and gained almost nothing. The Horde were a bunch of damn bachelors. They didn't have money, they only had their lives. After this war ended, most of the countries could only silently lick their wounds like beasts. Even as strong as Lordaeron, they would go from rich to poor in an instant. The other countries did not care about Lordaeron because of practical difficulties. By then, it would be very natural for Lordaeron to want to attack Alterac. Not to mention that the Barra family's fief, Caer Darrow and Darrowshire, bordered Lordaeron's territory. It was so convenient and had a perfect excuse. If not Alterac, who would they eat? Of course, this was from Lordaeron's point of view. To Duque, he was very unhappy. When the alliance fought against the Horde, every family lost money. There was no benefit at all. Why was Lordaeron the only one to gain territory? In his heart, Duque scolded, "It's fine if Lordaeron is a big country. Since we're all the same, don't pretend to be a saint. Isn't it better to be more direct?" Hee. Terenas, if you're too ugly, I don't mind making you cry. Since he had transmigrated and knew the general direction of history, Duque would be too stupid not to make arrangements. No one knew that Duque had made so many arrangements before the end of the war. They only knew that the diligent deputy commander visited the leaders of several countries to coordinate the troops again. Then, on the second day, Lothar arrived. The brave Lothar arrived on a griffin. Duque, without saying anything else, Lothar came up and gave Duque a bear hug. "It's been hard on you." Lothar did not say it out loud, but his eyes were already wet. Then, Lang came up too, and the two of them hugged each other tightly. Chapter 445. It hadn't been an easy day. The situation of the battle had been reported to Lothar. Lothar, who knew the army well, was also clear about how advantageous the current situation was for the alliance. If Orgrim really led the elites to attack Rotterdam City, it would undoubtedly be a fatal blow to the morale of the alliance. To be honest, hundreds of thousands of people had died in the war, and the actual number of deaths was definitely more than 1 million. In particular, the lands of the various countries had fallen one after another. If Rotterdam, the symbol of the spirit of the alliance, were to fall, the morale of the alliance would definitely collapse, and the kings of the various countries would only care about themselves. However, Duque managed to defend Rotterdam City. Not only did he manage to defend it, but he also created an opportunity to annihilate the orcs. Even Lothar, a veteran commander who had been immersed in the military for the first half of his life, felt that he was inferior to Linley. At the beginning of the establishment of the alliance, Lang and Anduin had the mentality that they would die on the battlefield even if they had to cling to the ideals of restoring their nation. Now, they really saw hope for the revival of Stormwind. The tribe was already weak, and they were just short of a blow to make the tribe go from being on the offensive to being on the defensive. "Well done," Lang said softly, but he had subconsciously tightened his grip. Lang's grip was not as strong as Anduin's, but it was not much weaker. Duque felt a little pain. Anduin, the bastard, glanced at Aurelia, who was waiting quietly not far away, and then solemnly said to Duque, "Duque, it's time for you to train up." *CK. Duque cursed. Almost at the same time, Anduin was almost hit by an arrow. An arrow made of wind brushed past Lothar's head. If it weren't for the fact that the commander had reacted quickly and lowered his head, he would probably have turned from a handsome man with long hair to a bald man. Illyria's noble and elegant demeanor, that smile that would make anyone feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. Who would have thought that this Windrunner general, who theoretically belonged to the Stormwind Kingdom, had just assassinated the commander of the alliance? It was over. The highest level of the alliance's military conference officially began. The topic was very simple. It was how to wipe out the two invading tribes. Just as Anduin arrived at Rotterdam City, Grom Hellscream's tribal army had already arrived less than 30 kilometers to the west of Rotterdam City. Of course, the Silverpine Forest's southern army led by Lothar was also 30 kilometers behind this tribal army. After confirming the battle report again, Anduin raised his head and asked Duque, "Are you sure the tribe in the west doesn't know about Ghoul Dan's betrayal?" Duque shrugged. "I can only say 90%. After all, there is no magic communication in the tribe. Moreover, I've already ordered Kudrin's griffins to intercept any messengers from the tribe's dragon riders day and night. Kudrin's rumbling voice sounded. My compatriots have tried their best. I sent 30 squads to take turns to sweep the area, but they did not find any dragon riders. Duque waved his hand to show that it was fine. According to my calculations, even Orgrim's main force would only find out about Gul'dan's escape tonight. The terrain of the Alterac Mountains is too complicated. Intercepting messengers is not very effective. However, as long as we can intercept the messengers heading to the Western Front. At this time, almost all the big shots' eyes lit up. There were no fools here. Everyone could imagine how the morale of the main force of Orgrim near the Alterac Mountains would be affected when they found out about Gul'dan's betrayal. Retreat was almost an inevitable choice. More importantly, the Western army of the Horde still did not know. Grom's people were still foolishly following the previous orders and heading to Rotterdam City to prepare for the two armies to join forces and attack the city. To be honest, if Gul'dan's two clans were here, 150,000 elites of the Horde, a large number of twin-headed ogres and mages, as well as a freakishly strong Gul'dan, it would be hard to tell who would win if they fought against the Alliance. But it was completely different now. The Alliance could use the time difference to gather their forces and take down the Western army of the Horde when the main force of Orgrim wanted to retreat. That way, the entire Tirisful forest would not be destroyed. Be it Rotterdam or the Alliance, they would have more confidence to launch a counterattack. This was a great opportunity to take revenge on the Horde and even build a career. It was an unprecedented glory to annihilate a tribal army in an organized way. Everyone cast their eager gazes at Anduin. At this time, Anduin looked at Duque instead. If I want you to defend Rotterdam City to the death and not let a single tribe come to the west of Rotterdam City for 3 days, how many troops do you need? Without hesitation, Duke raised his palm, and his 5 fingers appeared in front of his eyes. 50,000? Anduin looked at it and felt that it was a little too little. But since Duque said it was possible, it should not be a problem. In the entire alliance, there was no other commander under his command who could make him feel at ease. Turayan grew quickly, but Turayan was the kind of general who did things step by step. He could do any task assigned to him well, but he could not create surprises, not to mention miracles. In the next second, Duque made everyone look at his miraculous halo. No, I mean leave me a squadron of Griffin Knights. Together with Kuel Salis and my rangers and mages, 5,000 people will be enough. Any more is just to make up the numbers. If you like it, leave 30,000 new soldiers and 5,000 city guards for me. The city guards would not be counted as combat power by the big shots of the Alliance. Everyone knew that infantrymen who had not gone through strict military training would be like sending food to the elites of the upper tribes. Of course, it was another matter for some of the experts who had reached the level of champion knights. Orgrim wouldn't let his entire frontline army be annihilated. Even if they really wanted to break out of the encirclement, 150,000 elite beastmen breaking out of the encirclement was a completely different concept in terms of deterrence compared to 50,000 beastmen. It was conceivable that even if Orgrim retreated, he would find a way to go through the north of Rotterdam City and meet up with Grom's Western Legion before leaving in a dignified manner. Without a complete defensive line, the Alliance would have no choice but to send the 150,000-strong horde out of the northern continent as if they were sending off a king. As for when they would launch a counterattack on the southern continent, only God knew. Now, Duke, who actually boasted that 5,000 men would be enough? There was a commotion in the meeting room. Duque sighed. All right, let me show you the new product of my weaponry workshop. Kill 3000 Type A? Chapter 446. Kill 3000 Type A? What the hell was that? Many of the leaders of the Alliance were confused, such as King Salas of Stormguard and General Haas of Alterac. Only those who had worked with Duque before had a strange look on their faces. Apart from Duque's human-like appearance, anyone would think that Duque was a dwarf in human skin just by looking at his so-called inventions. Yes, it was those guys in the furnace fort who had wild ideas. No, they had wild ideas. Goblins loved explosions. Explosions were the art of the goblins. When they blew up their enemies, they would also send themselves to hell. Dwarves loved to court death. Unreliable inventions were the hallmark of the dwarves. Before the fall of Nomarigan, seeing the dwarves spend a lot of money on all kinds of unreliable inventions was enough to give the kings of the Alliance a heart attack. But Duque was definitely an exception. He did not have many inventions, but each one could completely change the situation on the battlefield. From the FFF flamethrower, which was famous for roasting orcs in the western battlefield, to the demon spirit, which forced the trolls to jump into the river in the eastern forest. Although there were only 2 inventions, Duque had the confidence to use them for military purposes, mass production. And it was a huge success. Now, at the most critical moment, there was a new invention? The leaders of the Alliance were stunned. Duque snapped his fingers. "Please come to the Imperial Garden." Your Majesty Menethil, please inform the guards in the palace not to panic when they hear the explosion." Terenas nodded. The show began. After a loud explosion, the leaders of the Alliance were shocked. "How much of this do you have?" 5,000. "Not enough." Anduin and Terenas said in unison. Duque shrugged. "I'm out of money. I don't have enough gunpowder. You know how greedy the goblins are." Terenas panicked. "If I give you the money immediately, how much can you make in the shortest time possible?" 50,000 in 24 hours. This battle concerned the safety of Lordaeron City. If they failed, or if Lordaeron City fell before the Western Legion was destroyed, Terenas would not even have a place to cry. Knowing that Duque should have some cash on hand, Terenas had no choice but to give Duque 2 million gold coins. Just like that, as the Alliance prepared to encircle and annihilate him, Orgrim was forced into a corner. First, the troops that he fell behind were ambushed by the Alliance. The Silverhand Knights, who were supposed to help the main force of the Rotterdam retreat, actually used griffins to carry them to the Alterac mountain after getting rid of the tribe's pursuit. These were the most capable elites of the Alliance. They directly attacked the rear of the tribe on the mountain path. The number of Knights of the Silver Hand was barely over 100, but each of the paladins could fight against 10 or even 100. The tribe, which originally had the advantage of individual soldiers in the mountains, was directly defeated by the Silver Hand. Orgrim waited in the valley at the foot of the mountain for 3 days, and only managed to gather a little more than 10,000 people. Perhaps less than 2,000 people had been killed, but most of them had been defeated. The orcs who had lost their leader ran all over the mountain. And for some reason, the Silver Hand purposely let go of the ogres who were the biggest threat to the city wall, and instead targeted the commander of the tribe to kill. Orgrim had a bad feeling about this. On the same day that Lothar arrived at Lordaeron City, Orgrim finally received a piece of news that he did not want to hear. "Great Chief!" Orgrim glanced around and saw one of his soldiers pointing to the sky. Could it be that more griffins were coming? He thought in disgust. If the Alliance did not have these annoying guys, the Horde would have dominated the entire sky with the help of the Red Dragon army. Unfortunately, before Zuluhid brought back a new batch of red dragons from the grim battle fortress in the wetlands. The Horde had no choice but to watch the griffins shit on their heads every day and monitor their movements. But Orgrim was still worried. These dwarf griffin knights were very strong, their mounts were fast, and their stormhammer was as deadly as the orcs' warhammers. Although they were small, they could not be ignored. So if more griffins were to attack, he had to make sure that the trolls were ready to fight. The black shadow grew bigger and bigger. Its body was very long, and it was obvious that it was not a griffin. As it approached, the great chief heard the cheers of his soldiers. A young red dragon over 1,000 years old. That was good news. This huge creature could easily intimidate over 100 griffins. When a dragon was over 1,000 years old, its attack, defense, and speed would be greatly improved compared to a young dragon who was less than 1,000 years old. When a young dragon stepped into the realm of giant dragons, he could use magic. And it was the kind of powerful draconic magic that could be used at high speed without the need for incantations. Giant dragons were definitely the most terrifying existence on the battlefield. The dragon landed on the riverbank next to the small river that ran across the valley. As soon as it touched the ground, a burly orc jumped down from the saddle on the dragon's back. Orgrim swung his hammer over his back and strode forward to meet the enemy. "Where is the great chief?" the dragon knight shouted. "This is an emergency." "I'm right here." As Orgrim replied, all the horde warriors parted like a tide, automatically making a path for him. "What's the matter?" "Then that bastard is finally willing to come over?" The dragon knight turned around to face Doomhammer. Orgrim immediately recognized him. He was a trusted aide of Zul'Uherd and a very capable warrior. It was said that he was one of the first people who dared to tame a giant dragon. Thorgrim. Yes, that was his name. "Great chief, please come over." Thorgrim waved his hand. Orgrim proudly walked into the circle formed by the dragon's tail. The others understood that this was definitely a highly confidential matter. Even the chief's personal guards took a few steps back to let them talk alone. "Speak." Before Thorgrim spoke, his broad face had a strange and complicated expression. Orgrim could see that there was anger, confusion, and even shame and fear. Thorgrim did not dare to look the great chief in the eye. "Gul'd and escaped. After you left the borders of Kuel Salis with your main force, he and Gujar took the Twilight Hammer and the rest of the Storm Predator clan with them. After they reached the hinterlands, they sailed into the Endless Sea and headed south." Chapter 447. What? Impossible. Only then did Orgrim understand why Torghese had such a complicated expression of fear on his face. In his rage, he felt the blood in his body boil. His hand gripped the handle of his hammer so tightly that the wood of the handle made a cracking sound. Orgrim couldn't control his emotions at all. He pulled out his warhammer and swung it in the air, drawing a dark arc in the air. Asterisk bang. Asterisk the hammer smashed into the ground, and it sank deep into the ground. The violent bombardment caused a large amount of rubble to fly out. The momentum was quite terrifying. Not only were the guards on guard nearby startled, but even the young red dragon Torghese was startled. The dragon stared at Orgrim with its eyes that were filled with caution and shock. "I knew it. I knew that the altars he made would have a huge problem. I was stupid enough to let him transform those ogres to fill the gaps in his army." The chief's eyes were bloodshot, and he even let his fangs sink deep into his lips. The sharp fangs were stuck in his lips, and blood immediately seeped out. Why was I so stupid? He had warned himself countless times that this warlock was selfish, but at that time, the pressure from the magic of humans and elves was too great. In order to get a weapon that could fight against magic, he was too excited and neglected this point. I shouldn't have treated this guy who sold souls to demons as a beastman. The thousands of years of beastman rules made Orgrim ignore Gul'dan. Before the establishment of a tribe, the beastman clans always used the bravest method to resolve all conflicts. If there were any objections, they could meet at Makagora. Once the winner was decided, the loser would unconditionally obey the orders of the winner. Gul'dan was too cunning, so cunning that he was not a beastman at all. He did not resist Orgrim's annihilation of the Shadow Council, and he humbly submitted to the chief. Then, he was even more human than the despicable humans, and when the tribe needed him the most, he cheated the entire tribe. "Great chief." Zul'Uherd suggested that we should send out a hunting team to punish these traitors. Gul'dan's sorcery cannot protect all the ships, but we can give him enough pain. "Great chief, please give the order." While Torghese was waiting for the great tribal chief's order, another orc ran over. Sobek, the young second-in-command of the Blackrock clan. He was promoted after the two sons of the previous chief, Blackhand, decided to split off and form a new clan. Because of Orgrim's rage, the young dragon beside them was slapping the ground with its tail. Sobek had no choice but to stop 5 or 6 meters away from it. "Great chieftain, Hellscream's army is already not far from the west of Lordaeron. Should we attack now or wait for Gul'dan? When Gul'dan and the others come, we'll have more people." Orgrim smiled bitterly. However, his thoughts were still moving very quickly. "More people? No one else will come here. Sobek's face was full of shock. Gul Dan betrayed us. Orgrim looked at his assistant and told him what had happened with great difficulty. Then what should we do? Sobek immediately suggested angrily. Betrayal must be punished severely. We should immediately go back and wipe out Gul Dan and his clan. Are you out of your mind? Grom's Warsong clan is attacking the west gate of Lordaeron as agreed. Are you going to abandon our brothers and take revenge on your own? Orgrim roared. Both Sobek and Togiz were speechless. Togiz set off immediately. Inform Grom to stop attacking the human city. Tell him and his people to attack the human camp in the north. We'll attack from both sides. We'll meet up after destroying the human camp. Then we'll go back and take revenge on Gul Dan. At this moment, Togiz's young dragon suddenly spoke in the common language. I refuse to die for such a stupid order. The dwarves have at least 500 griffins and a griffin king waiting for me. Even I can't break through this encirclement. Orgrim's gaze suddenly sharpened. You mean the alliance was prepared? It seems so. They purposely let me in, but they made it seem like they forbade me from flying west. When the dragon said this, Orgrim was shocked. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Could it be that the humans already knew that Gul Dan would betray them? Or perhaps the humans had colluded with Gul Dan and plotted against the entire horde. This wasn't something inconceivable. Since Alterak's king almost joined the horde, why couldn't that despicable bastard Gul Dan work with the humans? Right? That must be it. Orgrim could almost imagine that the damned Duke Marcus was gathering all his forces to prioritize the extermination of the exhausted Western Legion. I can't let this happen. Orgrim leapt onto a boulder and raised his warhammer in a battle stance. He roared at the warriors and the chieftains of the smaller clans who were looking at him. Gul Dan betrayed the beastmen. He betrayed the entire horde. The Duskhammers and the Stormskimmers have taken our ships and are heading south. As soon as he finished speaking, the beastmen around him erupted into a frenzy. They raised their weapons high and cursed Gul Dan in the most vicious manner possible. Everyone stared angrily towards the south, as if Gul'dan and his lackeys were just a little behind the horizon. Now, the glory of our people has reached a moment of life and death. But at the same time, our brothers from the Warsong clan are surrounded by 300,000 human soldiers. So, we must first take down the human camp in the north, then seek revenge on Gul'dan. Orgrim's strategy was completely correct. He had always been a qualified leader, looking at every problem from the perspective of the entire horde. However, he neglected one thing. The horde was still made up of many clans. This time, his words didn't receive a warm response. Most of the beastmen looked at him silently, no one responding to his call. Orgrim was shocked. He understood what the beastmen were thinking. Since the glory of the horde was the most important, since the glory of the horde is the most important, then we should first deal with that traitor Gul'dan. The Warsong clan? Weren't Grom Hellscream's Warsong clan very good at fighting? Let them deal with it themselves and the humans catch up. Chapter 448. Orgrim's hands were trembling from the shock and the rage he was suppressing in his heart. Victory was only one step away from him. He had thought that he would only need a few more days to take over the most important city of the Alliance and crush the will of the Alliance, turning them into stray dogs that would scatter the moment they met the horde. Now, he no longer had that chance, and the chances of victory were slim. But in his heart, glory was always the most important thing. Orcs who lost their glory were worthless. Killing the enemy was glory. Saving their brethren was glory. Killing the traitors was glory too. None of these could be left out. But why was everyone so eager to kill the traitors first? Orgrim saw the fear and hesitation in the eyes of the lesser chiefs. Fear? Hesitation? Were they still orcs? Just as Orgrim was about to explode, he suddenly saw a huge flag the size of the city gate rise from the east gate of Lordaeron. It was that damned Duke Marcus Blue Storm flag again. The chief's body trembled involuntarily. He understood now. This was the consequence of his failure to win against Duque. It was a huge explosion after accumulating so many times. Most orcs were innocent. Without so many twists and turns, they didn't know what a strategic retreat was. They only knew that their chief had never won against the owner of the Blue Storm flag even once. Or rather, winning was still considered a loss. When he refused to attack Kuel Salis, he was once again thought that he was afraid of Duque. Or rather, these lesser chiefs who had suffered under Duque no longer had any hope of winning against Duque. They would rather deal with Dan, who also seemed quite strange. Orgrim felt aggrieved. Tomorrow, the entire army will advance and attack the camp in the north of the human city. If anyone disagrees with my orders, then Makra will take care of them. If not, then go and prepare. Orgrim forcefully used his authority as the chief to approve this attack plan. After giving orders to the chiefs and their deputies, Orgrim was the only one left. The next day, Grom saw smoke rising from the other side of Lordaeron even though he did not receive any specific orders from Orgrim. One far away, two near. 3 smoke signals. This is the signal to attack. Smoke was a simple form of communication and could only be used to send simple signals. Seeing that the humans did not stop them from attacking the city, Grom subconsciously thought that Orgrim was pressuring the humans. From the very beginning, Grom had been attacking with his entire army. In less than half an hour, there was good news. "We're about to take the gate," an orc roared. Grom Hellscream's rugged face broke into a smile. Victory was right in front of them. Before this, no matter how many warriors he sent, they would not be able to take down the thick defensive line between the Silverpine Forest and the Tirisful Woodlands, but the situation had changed. While passing through the line of defense abandoned by the humans, Grom saw with his own eyes a large number of fire-breathing iron lumps abandoned by the side of the road. To the orcs, moving those heavy things was not a problem, but it would be difficult for the humans to use carriages to move those things on the narrow forest muddy roads. Obviously, Orgrim's attack on the main city of the Alliance from the east had caused a lot of panic among the humans. In the many days of marching, Grom saw many abandoned supplies, and even wounded soldiers who committed suicide in despair. The humans were panicking. That was what Grom was sure of. Actually, his judgment was not wrong. Before returning to Lordaeron, if not for Duque's plan, the entire Lordaeron army would have been defeated by the Horde's Western army. Even if they did not, other than Mograine's Scarlet Cross, the rest of the Lordaeron army would not have much combat power. Now, the city gate had been severely deformed by the relentless attacks of the orcs. Once the gate was breached, his warriors would be able to rush into the city, kill the remaining guards, and raze the city to the ground. With this as a stronghold, they could quickly occupy other parts of the continent, drive the humans to the coast, and push them into the sea. In the end, the continent would belong to the Horde, and they would end this war and start a new life. After holding back for so long, Grom finally saw hope. He carried his famous huge axe, Bloodhowl, in the Alliance and the Horde and watched his soldiers attack the city gate once again. If only the 2-headed ogres were here, Grom could not help but think. Those big guys would be able to climb up the city wall and use their weapons to carve a few holes in the thick stones. However, he was curious. Why did the battle cries sound like they were coming from the north of the city? Shouldn't it be better to attack the east gate if they wanted the humans to be distracted? But at this moment, there was a roaring sound from behind the city wall in the distance. Wind? Where did the wind come from? Looking from afar, a large golden cloud was gathering above the city gate at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, accompanied by a golden bolt of lightning, it struck the orcs who were attacking the city gate. Suddenly, the black oil that had floated on the moat was ignited. Flames shot into the sky, and almost instantly, the orcs who were crossing the moat and climbing the city wall were burned into human-shaped torches. Fire? It's fire again? The golden thundercloud continued to gather in the orcs' direction. A few bolts of lightning fell on the orcs' huge siege weapons, exploding in the midst of the orc infantry who were hiding behind the siege weapons and dodging arrows and javelins. With a few loud booms, flesh and blood flew everywhere. Grom's heart was bleeding. Those were the elites of the Warsong tribe. They had been through hundreds of battles and the baptism of fire in Silverpine Forest. They were wearing the thickest armor of the horde, and yet they were electrocuted just like that? The golden thunderballs created a few large holes in the ground that could bury dozens of people. The rocks that were blasted into the air, the broken limbs of the orcs, and the pieces of armor that flew out caused secondary damage to the surroundings. For a moment, screams of agony could be heard. At this moment, huge red fireworks rose from the north, west, and south of the orc army. Suddenly, a loud horn sounded from the three directions at the same time. 3 to 4 kilometers away, what looked like a forest suddenly became a blur. Then, rows of humanoid figures wearing silver armor appeared in front of the orcs. The silver wave surrounded the orc army in the shape of a crescent. It felt like there were countless human soldiers. Their numbers had long surpassed the orcs' mathematical abilities. Ordinary orcs only knew that there were a lot of humans. Chapter 449. This number could not be described in any beastman language. On such a vast piece of land that was measured in kilometers, the line of soldiers could actually form a row. Under the guidance of the drums, the human army marched in an orderly manner, covering each other and sealing off any possible escape route for the beastmen. On the southern lake, many warships sailed towards the lakeside at high speed. Their hulls were parallel to the shore, and they opened up the wooden planks that blocked the cannons, preparing to fire. Where did the humans find so many elites? Grum cried out. After fighting with the humans for so long, he could tell which were the elites and which were the farmers. It had nothing to do with equipment. Those who stood in a crooked straight line were the farmers who were delivering food to the beastmen. Those who were neatly dressed and lined up in a clear formation were mostly the elites. Of course, this also depended on how shiny their armor was. For example, if the Lordaeron army had shiny armor, Grum would not have a headache. That was because it was likely that they were just guards of honor. Those whose armor was much duller and had many spots on their shields were the veterans that the beastmen did not want to meet. At this moment, they were all elites who had been through hundreds of battles. In the north, those who wore blood-red armor with white edges were their old rivals. They had fought against the Lordaeron Scarlet Cross many times. In the northwest, those with a blue griffin flag with golden edges were the Stormwind Griffin Legion that Orgrim had mentioned many times. In the west, those who carried huge brown tower shields and a few long spears were the Dalagan Infantry. The Dalagan Infantry had never been the focus. The focus was on the mages hidden behind them. If they could not break through the infantry's defenses within 3 minutes, they would immediately be taught a lesson by the magic shot from the rear. Grom suddenly understood why Orgrim wanted to attack the human camp in the north. He wanted to open up a path of blood and rescue the Western Legion. Grom made the correct decision almost immediately. Everyone listen up. Abandon all the siege weapons and turn to attack the Red Legion in the north. Being correct did not equal to being effective. When Mograine, who was leading the army, saw that the orcs were attacking them as Anduin had predicted, the future legendary High Lord sneered. You shall pay for the sin of destroying the Silverpine Forest with your lives. The neatly advancing army stopped the moment Alexandros Mograine raised his fist. The warriors at the very front used the spikes at the bottom of their tower shields to fix their shields deeply into the thick grass. Every 5 meters or so on the battlefront, a path would be opened up, allowing a group of unarmored young farmers with only a basket to run out and pluck the grass on the grassland in front of the formation. In front of him, a veteran with burn scars on his face used his index finger to wipe his saliva. He raised his hand and felt the direction and speed of the wind. Very good. As expected, he has the upper hand. Just before the orc army arrived, the boys plucked all the grass and quickly retreated. Then, a large group of weird-looking fellows with huge metal cans on their backs and half a shield in front of their chests walked out from the formation. They also had a large metal pipe on their right waist. The appearance of these fellows gave the commanders of the tribe a bad feeling. When they rushed to the front and saw the 3 words, FFF, on the shields on their upper bodies, everyone knew that their bad premonition had come true. Fire. Monstrous fire. More convenient flamethrowers and even more flamethrowers. Hundreds of flamethrowers formed a belt of death that blocked the tribe's only escape route. The most disgusting thing was that the shields connected to the cans helped those fellows block most of the weapons thrown at them. Wanna leave? Sure. But please go to the fiery hell first. Grom had no choice but to let the few warriors of the Blackstone clan take the lead. On the other side, Orgrim's attack had also suffered a huge setback. Before the battle, for some reason, Gavinrad's brain spasmed. Last time, he saw Aurelia defeat an entire army with a single banner, and he wanted to do it again. Even though Duque said no, this guy still went crazy and wanted to die. In the end, tens of thousands of tribesmen chased after Gavinrad. Duque almost died laughing. If this guy wasn't a paladin with thick skin and temporary invincibility, Gavinrad would probably have died. Watching Gavinrad court death in front of the northern camp was quite amusing. Duke glanced at Illyria beside him and curled his lips. What's the matter? Are you confident that you can defeat 40,000 tribal elites with just a few people? Aurelia flicked her slender fingers, and her beautiful blonde hair flew in the wind. She gave Duque a provocative look. Who do you think I am? I'm Aurelia Windrun, a heroine destined to be remembered by the entire Alliance. Yes, yes, yes. Duque smiled and raised his hands in surrender. Walking down the simple wooden wall of the camp, Duque looked back at Aurelia and her 3 sisters who were standing on top of the gate. The 4 sisters each had their own strengths. It was already a blessing to have one of them as a subject. But now, he had taken the entire Windrunner family with him. Just thinking about it made him feel like he was exaggerating. Looking at Aurelia's sexy back, Duque suddenly remembered a saying. Gold will always shine. Orgrim's army began to charge. Then, they were attacked by the High Elven Rangers. Elven Rangers! The orc commander roared when he saw the archer's posture. The orcs immediately used all sorts of methods to protect their vitals. After experiencing the Battle of Quell, thus, even if they had never faced the Elven Rangers directly, these orcs still clearly knew that these Elven Rangers with unreasonably accurate archery were the nightmare of all orcs. Trolls and orcs were all races with strong vitality. If they did not hit their vitals, they would not die immediately. In the early days of the Elven Forest, there were many orcs who were like porcupines, with hundreds of arrows stuck in their bodies and continued to fight. It was indeed easy to scare the humans. But now, it was different. A green light that was almost the same color as the grass flashed past. The arrow actually hit the shoulder armor of a charging orc, and then refracted, piercing through the neck of the unlucky orc. Then, it hit the eye of the orc behind it with blood splattering everywhere. Another example was a powerful orc sword saint who deflected an arrow aimed at his face, only to find out that the arrow had killed an orc companion on his right. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.